unexpectedly hit your bank account.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, your monthly income gets a permanent welcome boost. What if we told you that for millions of Americans, this isn't a fantasy, but a very real outcome?
Yeah, it's actually happening.
Potentially meaning double the payments or substantially more benefits arriving directly at your door, finally catching you up on money you were always owed.
It's about getting what was rightfully theirs.
This isn't just about financial gains. It's about empowerment, stability, and recognizing what's rightfully yours.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a monumental shift in Social Security that's already putting billions of dollars back into the pockets of millions across the nation.
Yeah, our mission today is really to cut through the noise, and deliver the most important actionable insights. We're pulling directly from the very latest official updates and statements from the Social Security Administration.
Straight from the horse's mouth, basically.
Exactly. We're focusing on how this powerful information can directly empower and support you, especially if you stand to gain the most from these significant changes. We want to ensure you fully understand the substantial financial boost heading your way.
So where's this information coming from specifically?
We'll be drawing directly from authoritative sources, the latest official updates, statements from the SSA itself. We've even got recent comments from Acting Commissioner Frank Bizignano and a clear declaration from former Acting Commissioner Leland Dudek.
Okay.
This is information straight from the source, meticulously distilled to ensure you get the absolute core of what matters.
All right. Here's where it gets truly impactful. And it's something, well, many have waited decades for. This isn't some random windfall or a general stimulus package, right?
Not at all. That's a key point.
It's a direct, tangible result of a game-changing piece of legislation that was enacted just recently, the Social Security Fairness Act.
Mm-hmm. Game-changing is the right word.
This act is truly pivotal because it's specifically repealed two long-standing provisions that have, well, unfairly impacted millions of Americans for over 40 years.
Yeah, for a very long time.
We're talking about the windfall elimination provision, commonly known as WEP.
WEP, right.
And the government pension offset, or GPO.
WEP and GPO, yeah, those are the two. To really understand the significance of this repeal, it's important to briefly touch on what WEP and GPO actually did.
Okay, what was their purpose originally?
Well, these provisions were first put into effect way back in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Their original intent, supposedly, was to prevent what was perceived as double dipping.
Double dipping, how so?
Essentially, if you worked in a job where you didn't pay Social Security taxes, think of many state and local government employees like teachers, police officers, firefighters in certain states.
Right, jobs with their own pension systems.
Exactly. But if you also had enough Social Security covered earnings from other jobs, maybe earlier in your career or part-time, to qualify for a Social Security benefit, WEP would then reduce that Social Security benefit you earn.
Ah, okay, so it cut into the Social Security part.
It did. And similarly, GPO affected spouses and widowers. If you received a government pension based on your own work where you didn't pay Social Security taxes, GPO would reduce or something even completely eliminate your Social Security spousal or survivor benefit that you might have otherwise been entitled to based on your spouse's record.
Wow, eliminated entirely.
Yeah, it could be that drastic for some.
So for decades, these provisions had been actively reducing or offsetting the Social Security benefit checks for approximately 3.2 million people.
That's the estimated number, yeah, 3.2 million.
Think of it. A significant portion of their earned benefits was previously held back, even though they had contributed to the system through other employment.
Yeah.
That just feels, well, incredibly unfair.
It created a lot of financial strain and, frankly, a sense of injustice for many people who felt they earned both benefits.
Absolutely. Now, this landmark legislation is actively rectifying what those beneficiaries should have been getting all along. It's correcting a long-standing issue.
Righting a decades-long wrong.
Really? That has affected so many dedicated public servants and their families.
And what's truly compelling here is the scale of this positive reversal. As you said, WEP and GPO were in effect for over 40 years.
40 years?
Yeah, it meant a substantial portion of earned benefits for specific groups was held back, lower payments than they should have received. The repeal is fundamentally about correcting this historical issue, ensuring these beneficiaries now receive what they were always rightfully owed.
Restoring the full value.
Restoring the full value of their contributions. Now, it's crucial, absolutely crucial, to be very clear about who this directly impacts, because this is a targeted benefit, not for everyone on Social Security.
Okay, who is the target group here?
It primarily includes individuals who worked in public service, like teachers, police officers, firefighters, but specifically those who also had non-covered pensions.
Meaning their public service job didn't pay into Social Security.
Precisely. Their public pension was separate. It also significantly affected spouses and widows who were receiving a government pension from that kind of non-covered work, alongside a Social Security spousal or survivor benefit.
That's a critical distinction then. So it's not every teacher, firefighter, or police officer who will see an increase, correct?
Correct. That's a really important clarification. You've got to have that non-covered pension situation.
It's only those whose specific public pensions were not part of the Social Security system.
Exactly. In fact, estimates show that approximately 72% of state and local public employees were not affected by WEP or GPO to begin with.
Oh, really? The majority weren't affected.
Yeah, the majority. Their pensions might have already been integrated with Social Security, or maybe they didn't have enough non-covered service, or they had sufficient Social Security earnings from other work to avoid the offset hitting hard.
Okay.
So while this is monumental for those affected, it's about restoring benefits for a specific group who were previously disadvantaged by these rules. It's not a blanket increase for all public workers or all Social Security recipients.
That makes perfect sense. Clarity is key here. So for those 3.2 million people who were affected, who had a portion of their earned benefits held back, what does this actually translate to in terms of direct financial impact? What kind of money are we talking about?
Okay, let's just dive straight in because, wow, information's from Social Security itself, including recent things said by the acting commissioner.
Right. So our mission really for this deep dive is pretty clear. We want to unpack exactly what these payments are, get to the bottom of why they're happening right now, explore the full scale of the money involved, figure out who's getting them, and really focus on the significant financial benefit, the positive side of this for the recipients as this money hits their accounts.
Yeah.
It's really about understanding a major sort of financial correction that's underway.
Because, I mean, let's face it, getting a lump sum payment that averages over $6,000, that could genuinely be a game changer, financially speaking, for individuals, for families.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm really keen to get into the specifics and just highlight how big a deal this actually is for people.
And I'm ready to lay out the background, give you the details, and sort of break down the mechanics behind these very real and, like you said, very substantial figures. Help you see the whole picture of this distribution.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's get into it.
All right, so let's unpack this, starting with just the sheer scale. You said billions, but how much money has actually moved already, according to the sources?
Okay, so the core fact, and this is like unequivocally confirmed by Social Security officials, is these back payments are definitely being made. And the scale isn't just substantial, it's frankly enormous.
Right.
Based on the latest figures we're seeing cited, well over $15 billion has already been distributed.
$15 billion?
Yeah. This money has gone out to millions of people who were, determined to be owed these funds because of a recent change in the law.
Okay.
To be more precise, the figure you often see is around $15.3 billion that's already been successfully paid out to these beneficiaries. And that amount, I mean, by any standard, that's a vast amount of money flowing directly to individuals.
$15.3 billion already out the door. That number is so big, it's almost hard to get your head around it.
It really is.
It just underlines how many people and how much actual cash is involved here. And you mentioned that striking average payment earlier, the $6,710 figure. Can you tell us a bit more about what that average really means?
Yeah, absolutely. So that number, $6,710, that represents the reported average retroactive back payment amount per person. That's among those who have received or are said to receive these payments.
Okay.
Now, it's really, really important to remember this is an average.
Right. Key point.
Yeah, so it means that while, sure, some folks will receive less than $6,710, a significant number will have gotten amounts equal to or maybe even substantially more than that figure.
Ah, okay.
The fact that the average itself is that high, $6,710, just powerfully shows that these aren't, minor tweaks or small adjustments. These are substantial lump sum payments arriving all at once and representing a really significant financial boost for the people getting them. It's not just a little extra cash. For many, this is a meaningful financial event.
That distinction really matters, doesn't it? So the average gives us a benchmark, but it highlights that the typical person getting this is receiving over $6,700 in one go.
Exactly.
That kind of payment definitely feels like it could make a real, tangible difference in someone's financial situation, especially right now.
Oh, undoubtedly. It has the potential for a really significant positive impact. And, the distribution process isn't actually finished yet.
Oh, right.
The sources also indicate there's more money still earmarked to go out. There's about another $6 billion that Social Security expects to distribute.
Oh, another $6 billion.
Yeah, mostly within this current month, actually, to the remaining beneficiaries who are entitled to these payments.
So hold on. We've got $15.3 billion already sent out and another estimated $6 billion still coming.
That's the report, yes.
That brings the total amount flowing from this one initiative to, what, over $21 billion when it's all wrapped up?
That's the math. It's a truly monumental flow of funds resulting from this specific action.
Just incredible.
It really is a massive undertaking, a huge financial transfer. And like we've stressed, these aren't just, estimates floating around or projections.
Have to mention confirmation.
Exactly. All this info, the scale of payments made, the amounts still to be distributed, it's directly confirmed by top officials. Specifically, the Social Security Acting Commissioner, Frank Bisagno.
Okay.
He's provided updates on these payments and the process in recent public statements and reports. So that gives a really solid foundation for the credibility of these numbers and the reality of what's happening.
Yeah, that's important.
Official confirmation of a major financial distribution event.
Okay, so the scale is huge. It's verified by the leadership at Social Security, and it's happening right now. That gives us a really clear picture of the what and the how much. But what's the fundamental reason why these payments are happening now? Let's get into the core of that, which, according to the sources, points straight to specific legislation. These aren't just random checks being cut.
Precisely. Not random at all. These payments are the direct, intended result of a specific law, one that was passed by Congress and signed into law fairly recently.
Okay.
And this law fundamentally changed how Social Security benefits are calculated for a particular group of people.
And that law, the one at the heart of this, is the Social Security Fairness Act, right? I think a lot of people probably heard about that one. It was pretty significant.
Yes, it got a lot of attention.
Can you walk us through the timeline? How did it become a law?
Sure. So the Social Security Fairness Act, it moved through the legislative process towards the end of last year and the very beginning of this year. It passed the House of Representatives late last year. That was in November.
Right.
Then it passed the Senate in December. And the final crucial step was when it was signed into law by the president. That happened on January 5th of this year, 2024.
January 5th, 2024. Okay, so as of when the sources were reporting this, you said early June.
Yeah, roughly early June.
That means the law's only been on the books for about 6 months.
That's right, roughly 6 months.
Wow. So a law that's only about 6 months old is the direct reason for billions of dollars in retroactive back payments happening right now. What exactly did this Social Security Fairness Act do? What was the key change that triggered all this?
Okay, so this is where we get into the specifics that unlock these payments. The most significant thing the Social Security Fairness Act did, and the direct cause for these back payments we're talking about, was it repealed two really long-standing provisions within the Social Security system.
Okay, which ones?
These were the windfall elimination provision, which most people know as WEP.
The WEP, right? Heard of that.
And the government pension offset, or GPO.
WEP and GPO. Yeah, those names are familiar if you've ever looked into how, public pensions, certain government pensions affect Social Security. How long had those two been impacting people?
Oh, for a very long time. They were deeply embedded in the Social Security law. The sources say these provisions had been in effect for, well, quite a while. WEP dates back to the early 1980s.
Wow.
And GPO goes back even further to the late 1970s, specifically 1977 for GPO.
Goodness. So we're talking about rules that had been shaping benefit calculations for, what, roughly 40 to 50 years?
That's right, around 4 to 5 decades. A really substantial period for these rules to have been in place.
Incredible. So what did WEP and GPO actually do? Why is repealing them now causing these big back payments? What was their effect?
Okay, so these provisions, WEP and GPO, they were originally put in place to offset or reduce the Social Security benefit checks for people who also earned a pension from a job where they did not pay Social Security taxes.
Oh, okay, like certain government jobs?
Exactly. It commonly affects people in certain public sector roles, I think teachers, police officers, firefighters, in many states or localities that had their own separate pension systems outside of Social Security.
Right. I see.
The thinking behind WEP and GPO, from the perspective of the original lawmakers, was to prevent what they saw as a potential windfall.
The windfall.
Yeah, for people who got both a significant non-Social Security pension and a Social Security benefit, maybe based on just a relatively short time paying into the system. So basically, WEP cut the Social Security, retirement, or disability benefit amount.
Okay.
And GPO cut the spousal or survivor benefits for those same people.
Okay, let me see if I've got this. So if you worked a job, didn't pay into Social Security there, but you earned a pension from that job.
Right.
And you also had some other work history where you did pay into Social Security. These rules, WEP and GPO, would lower the Social Security benefit you would otherwise have gotten.
That's a perfect summary of their effect, And the sources state that these provisions were actively offsetting or reducing benefit checks for about 3.2 million people across the country.
3.2 million people.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the crucial point now is that the repeal of WEP on GPO by this Social Security Fairness Act means that those roughly 3.2 million people, they're now eligible to get their full Social Security benefits.
Ah.
The amount they would have been entitled to if WEP and GPO had never existed or weren't applied to them, the repeal basically restored their eligibility for the full benefit amount based on their earnings record.
That makes perfect sense. The law that was cutting their benefit is gone. Poof. So now they're legally owed a higher monthly amount. But that still doesn't quite get us to the huge back payments we started with. Why are they getting this money as a lump sum reaching back in time instead of just, a higher monthly check starting from January?
Right.
That must take us to the next really key piece, the retroactivity and how these big lump sums are actually calculated.
Yes, this detail is absolutely fundamental to understanding why the payments are so large and arriving as lump sums. So while the Social Security Fairness Act was signed into law on January 5th of this year, 2024 again, only about 6 months ago,
right,
a really key and powerful provision within that act made the repeal of WEP and GPO effective retroactively.
Retroactively? How far back?
It didn't just start applying from the day it was signed. It went all the way back to January of last year, 2023.
January 2023. So wait, the law passed in 2024, but its effect on benefits is calculated like it had been law since the start of 2023.
That's exactly right. That's the core meaning of retroactivity here.
Wow, that's quite something.
It is. And it means that for all those beneficiaries who were hit by WEP and GPO, whose benefits were previously cut, they are now being caught up. They're getting the money they should have been receiving in their monthly Social Security checks based on the new law, starting all the way back in January of last year, 2023.
So it's like they're going back and rewriting the payment history for these folks. For over a year, maybe even longer, depending on when their benefits started, they were getting a reduced amount. And now the law says, no, hold on. For all those past months, you should have actually been getting more.
That is precisely what's happening.
Yep.
And this retroactive application, that's exactly how you get these large back payments. Let's look at the numbers the sources give us to make it concrete.
Yeah, okay.
The sources mentioned that, on average, these beneficiaries were supposedly getting about $360 less per month than they would have if WEP and GPO hadn't been applied. That's the average monthly difference in their check.
Okay. About $360 a month less on average than they should have gotten under the new rules, going back to January 2023.
Correct. So to calculate the big lump sum back payment, Social Security basically takes that average monthly underpayment amount, the $360 in this example,
right,
and multiplies it by the total number of months since January of last year that the person didn't receive their full unoffset benefit amount.
Got it. So if we count the months, January 2023 through, let's say someone got their payment recently or is getting it now in June 2024.
Go ahead.
From January 23 to June 24, that's 12 months in 23 plus 6 months in 24. That's 18 months.
Yep, about 18 months.
Well, if you take that $360 a month average, multiply it by 18 months.
Yeah.
Well, let's see, 360 times 18, that's $6,480.
Exactly.
Hey, that lines up almost perfectly with the reported average payment figure of $6,710.
It really does. That simple calculation shows exactly how accumulating that average missed monthly amount over the whole retroactive period, stretching back to January of last year, directly creates these big lump sum retroactive back payments.
Right.
It's simply the difference between the smaller benefit they did get for all those past months
Right.
and the full benefit they're now considered to have been entitled to for that same time, all played out in one single catch-up amount. It's literally correcting the historical payment record.
Okay, that mechanism is crystal clear now. It's not some random bonus payout. It's the accumulated total of the benefits they were legally supposed to get for over a year, but couldn't until the law changed and was applied backwards.
Precisely.
This really underscores the huge financial benefit for those individuals who were impacted by WEP and GPO for so long. They're effectively getting more than a year's worth of restored benefits all at once.
It represents a very substantial financial correction, yes.
Yeah.
And a significant positive infusion of cash, delivering the full benefit amount they're now entitled to, and essentially making them financially whole for that retroactive period.
Okay, so we've got the scale, the legislative why, and the retroactive how that builds these lump sums. Let's shift to what's happening right now. The distribution process itself and the timeline for the payments that are still left. Who's getting these payments currently, and when is this whole thing supposed to be finished?
Okay, so based on the info in our sources, the folks who are currently receiving or are still waiting for these specific payments, it's primarily the remaining group of approximately 900,000 people.
900,000, so just under 1 million people still waiting.
Yeah, just shy of 1 million. And it's worth noting, while that's obviously a lot of people, it's actually a smaller chunk of the total estimated 3.2 million affected by the WB GPO repeal. Many of those folks have already received their payments.
Ah, okay.
So this remaining group is the focus of the current ongoing distribution efforts.
Why are they still waiting, this group of around 900,000, especially when over $15 billion has already gone out? Are there specific challenges getting these particular payments processed?
Yeah, according to the sources, the main reason seems to be related to the complexity of their specific cases. The sources say these require manual processing.
Manual processing, what does that mean exactly?
Well, unlike some benefit adjustments that can maybe be handled largely by automated computer systems, the unique circumstances or calculations needed for these particular beneficiaries apparently require review and processing by actual human staff members at Social Security.
Okay, so someone has to physically look at the file, do the math.
Essentially, yes. It's a more hands-on process. And the sources mention that staff are reportedly being, pulled from other duties or reassigned within Social Security operations, specifically to prioritize this manual processing and get these payments out for this group of roughly 900,000 individuals.
Wow, okay.
That sounds like a pretty significant administrative lift.
Manual processing for almost 1 million people. Yeah, that sounds like it would definitely take some time and effort. Is there a confirmed timeline for when these remaining payments accounting for that other $6 billion or so still to be distributed will actually be done?
Yes, and this is probably the most important piece of news for those who are still waiting. The sources give us a confirmed timeline, apparently coming directly from Social Security's acting commissioner.
Yep.
He has indicated that by the end of this month, June, which, given the timing of the sources in early June, means within the next few weeks.
Right.
All of these remaining payments are expected to be completely distributed to those remaining 900,000 people.
Okay, that's a pretty concrete deadline then. So the official target is, by the very end of June, basically everyone who was affected by the WEP-GPO repeal and is owed these retroactive back payments should have gotten their money.
That is indeed Social Security's stated goal and commitment. Based on these reports.
Yeah.
They've indicated they're putting resources towards making sure these manual processes get finished and that remaining $6 billion or so gets sent out by that deadline.
That's good news.
Yeah, it's definitely a positive development. It provides clarity and a definitive endpoint to the waiting period for these beneficiaries. It ensures they get the substantial payments they're entitled to very, very soon.
Yeah, knowing there's a firm target date for getting a payment that averages over $6,700 and maybe even more, as we'll get to, that has to be incredibly reassuring for that group still waiting.
Absolutely. It provides a clear expectation and a timeline for receiving what could be a very significant sum of money, letting them plan accordingly.
Okay, now let's touch on something interesting that was hinted at in the sources regarding that average payment amount. You just mentioned it. Section 5 discusses the potential for the average lump sum to actually climb even higher than that initial $6,710 figure. Tell us about that possibility.
Right. So at this point, while it's presented maybe with a little bit of speculation in the sources. It's based on a pretty logical observation. It's about how these lump sums are calculated and the fact that distribution is still ongoing.
Okay.
The sources suggest that the currently reported average of $6,710 might not be the final overall average once every single payment is factored in.
Right.
There's a real possibility that the overall average could actually creep up.
Why would it go up? If the calculation method that monthly difference times the number of retroactive months is the same for everyone, how does that work?
Well, that's exactly the reasoning they offer, and it makes sense when you think about it.
Sure.
The longer it takes for Social Security to process and send out these payments, which, as we just discussed, is happening with the manual processing, causing delays for these last 900,000 people.
Right. The delays.
The more months of retroactive pay accumulate for those recipients who are getting their payments later in the cycle.
I think I see where this is going. So someone who got their lump sum way back in, say, February or March of this year, they received that monthly difference multiplied by a certain number of months going back to January 2023. But someone who's getting their payment now in June or even near the end of June deadline, they've racked up several more months of missed payments since January 2023.
Exactly right. Since the total lump sum is calculated directly by multiplying that average monthly amount by the total number of retroactive months, getting the payment later means you're multiplying by a larger number of months.
Makes sense.
More accumulated months naturally equals a larger total lump sum payment.
That's a clear consequence of the timing, isn't it? So for those who've had these delays because of the manual processing, while the wait might have been frustrating, the silver lining, maybe, could be a bigger overall payment when it finally lands. Because more retroactive months are baked into the calculation.
Precisely. So therefore, as the distribution process finishes up and reaches those individuals who've waited longer, the ones whose manual processing took more time, the average payment across the entire group of recipients looking at the whole distribution could potentially get pulled higher.
Interesting.
The sources even toss out some potential figures suggesting possible new overall averages. They cite numbers like maybe $6,822 and even suggest it could potentially reach as high as $7,800 or possibly more once all these later, potentially larger payments are factored into the total average.
Wow. Okay, so not only are people getting these really significant lump sums that are already averaging over $6,700, but there's a possibility, just based on the mechanics of the timeline, that the overall average could climb even higher, which means many recipients are getting, or will get, payments significantly larger than even that initial average figure.
It certainly reinforces the idea that this represents a truly substantial financial benefit for these beneficiaries, yes.
Yeah, it definitely highlights the potential for an even greater positive financial impact for many folks who've been waiting, simply because of the time it took to get everything processed and finalized. The longer the retroactive period covered, the bigger the final check.
That's the logic, yeah.
Okay, this has been a really thorough breakdown of these Social Security back payments. Let's just pause for a second and quickly recap the main points, especially the positive benefit and where things stand right now.
Sure. So to summarize the key takeaways, Social Security is definitely distributing significant retroactive back payments right now. These payments are substantial, averaging over $6,700 per person currently, and potentially that average could rise. These funds are going to millions of beneficiaries, the ones who were previously affected by those now repealed rules, WEP and GPO.
Got it.
And the money itself represents benefits that, under the new law, they should have been receiving starting way back in January of last year. So essentially, it's a big catch-up payment, covering over a year's worth of previously reduced benefits.
Okay.
And crucially, the final batch of these payments, the ones for the remaining roughly 900,000 individuals needing that manual processing, is expected to be fully distributed very soon. The target is by the end of this month, June. That should bring this whole significant initiative to a close.
It's really fascinating, isn't it, to see how one specific law change signed just this year can have such a direct, immediate, and frankly huge financial impact on millions of people, and reaching back over a year in time to correct their benefit amounts and deliver these really substantial lump sums.
It really is a powerful demonstration. It shows how changes in the law can positively reshape someone's financial reality, making them whole for past benefit reductions and providing a significant lump sum infusion of funds as that correction gets applied retroactively.
So thinking about this for you, the listener, What does understanding the specific origins and mechanics behind these huge payments suggest about the real-world impact of policy decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question to ponder.
Yeah.
I mean, this whole process, it does raise an important point. When you consider that these payments are fixing a policy that was in place for decades
Right, 40, 50 years.
and delivering these large lump sums covering more than a year of benefits, what does this scale of retroactive correction tell us about the long-term consequences of legislative choices? And then thinking about the individual level, how might getting a lump sum payment averaging over $6,700, maybe even significantly more, how might that tangibly change the financial picture, the opportunities, or just the sense of security for the people who've been patiently waiting for these restored benefits?
Yeah.
It's a really powerful illustration, I think, of policy having a very real dollars and cents effect on people's actual lives.
It certainly is a lot to think about. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Social Security back payments currently being distributed. We really hope that unpacking all these details has been insightful and maybe clarified what's happening with this significant financial event.
Yeah, we appreciate you tuning in and exploring these sometimes complex topics with us. Keep being curious, keep asking questions.
We'll catch you on the next.
Okay, get ready for this because, wow, there is some seriously significant money moving from Social Security right now. I mean, really significant.
We're not talking small change here.
No way. We're talking billions, literally billions, already sent out. And billions more are still on the way. Payments hitting individual accounts that are averaging like well into the thousands of dollars.
It's pretty staggering when you see the numbers laid out.
And this isn't some rumor mill stuff, you know. It's confirmed. It's a large-scale financial thing happening as we speak. And it could mean a huge financial boost for millions of people. More money, maybe even arriving sooner than expected for some. It's exciting stuff.
It really is. And what's compelling, looking at our source material here, is just the scale of it all and the specifics. We're not just talking vague projections or, the usual monthly benefit talk.
Right.
We've got confirmation. We've got hard numbers. They detail exactly how much cash is moving, precisely why it's happening, and who's actually getting it. It's a very specific moment, you could say, in how Social Security operates.
Yeah, and directly linked, the source says, to recent legislation, right?
Exactly. Tied directly to a specific law change, not just a random event.
Okay, and that's exactly what this deep dive is all about today. We have this detailed explanation right in front of us, and it pulls together all the key facts, including, importantly, confirmation straight from, official sources, Social Security itself.
Which gives it that credibility.
Absolutely. So, our mission here, let's cut through any noise, any confusion, and get right to the core of this. What exactly are these payments? Who is getting them? What's a very specific reason, the law behind it all? What's the timeline look like? When's more money coming? What does it all mean?
Yeah, unpack it piece by piece.
We're going to use the precise details, the figures, right here in our source material to give you, hopefully, a really clear, informed, deep understanding of this major financial development, a potential big benefit for many.
And I think it's worth, emphasizing right at the start, based on what we're seeing in the source, this isn't just some random payout. It's not a minor tweak.
No.
It's a targeted thing. It's a distribution that comes directly from a specific legal change. And it's essentially correcting past payment amounts, understanding that context. That's really key to grasping why these sums are so large and why they're arriving now.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm ready to help connect those dots for you, lay out the facts just as they're presented in our source.
Fantastic. Let's dive right in then, and let's start where the source does with the hard numbers, because honestly, they're pretty astonishing.
They really are. The source material, it grounds us immediately in the reality of what's occurring. It confirms, absolutely unequivocally, that Social Security is sending out substantial back payments.
So fact, not hypothetical, happening now.
Confirmed fact, yeah, from official channels.
And the size of the individual payments. That's what really jumps out first, doesn't it? What did the source tell us about the average amount, the average back payment per person?
Okay, yeah. The source gives us a very precise figure for this. The average back payment per person is currently pegged at $6,710.
$6,710 as an average. Just let that sink in for a second. That is a significant chunk of money for almost anybody, let alone for folks relying on Social Security benefits. And crucially, like you said, that's an average.
Right. That's the key point.
Which means, yeah, some people are getting around that amount, maybe a bit less.
Yeah.
But many, many others are getting considerably more than $6,710.
Absolutely. The average tells part of the story, but the range could be quite wide.
For a lot of recipients, getting an unexpected lump sum check for, over $6,000, maybe $7,000 or even more, that represents a really substantial financial benefit. It could have a major positive impact on their lives right now.
It absolutely could. And then when you zoom out and look at the total amount of money that has already been distributed, the scale just becomes even clearer. The source is reporting that well over $15 billion has already gone out.
15 billion. With a B. That's just enormous.
It is. It's a huge number. The source actually gives a slightly more precise figure, stating it's approximately $15.3 billion that's already been distributed to millions of people. Just try to picture that. $15.3 billion in funds actually reaching beneficiaries' bank accounts. It really underscores how widespread and impactful these payments actually are.
That kind of money flowing, directly to individuals, the potential positive ripple effect is immense. But wait, the payments haven't actually stopped yet, have they? Our source says this is still happening.
That's correct. Very much ongoing. The source reveals the distribution process. It isn't finished yet. There's still roughly another $6 billion, give or take.
Another $6 billion.
Yeah, another $6 billion expected to be sent out this month to more beneficiaries who are still waiting for their specific payments. So yeah, while a massive amount, that $15.3 billion has already gone out, the story is very much still unfolding right now. Billions more on the way soon.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap those incredible numbers from the source again. Over $15 billion already distributed. Another $6 billion, roughly, expected this very month. And individual payments are averaging over $6,700. These are not minor adjustments. These are major financial benefits being delivered in these lump sums.
Correct. Substantial amounts.
And very importantly, the source really highlights the credibility behind all these figures, doesn't it? It's not just speculation.
Yes, that's absolutely key. This isn't based on, internet rumors or just rough estimates. These facts are confirmed by high-level officials within Social Security.
Like who?
The source specifically mentions that the Social Security Acting Commissioner, a gentleman named Frank Bisagno, has confirmed these details. And apparently he's discussed them publicly, including in recent interviews that the source noted.
Okay, so the acting commissioner himself.
Yes. That tells us these figures and the whole ongoing process, it's coming directly from official channels, which adds, significant weight to the information. These are the official numbers.
Knowing that these figures come straight from the top, from the acting commissioner, that really grounds these incredible numbers in reality. It's not hype.
Exactly.
And just stepping back for a moment, thinking about the listener. Someone receiving one of these average payments, say, over $6,700. What does our source sort of imply about the potential real-world impact, the benefit?
Well, for many of the recipients, especially those who were affected by the specific provisions that got repealed, and we'll definitely get into the details of that soon.
Okay.
For them, this isn't just like extra pocket money. It represents a significant financial benefit that could address some really crucial needs.
Like what?
It could mean, paying off some nagging debt that's accumulated, covering unexpected medical bills, which can pop up anytime, maybe funding necessary home repairs that have been put off, providing a bit more of a cushion, a buffer for future expenses, or, simply offering a bit more financial security day to day.
Yeah, peace of mind.
Exactly. The source's focus on these as substantial back payments really highlights that this is money that was due to them under the new legal framework. And getting it all at once, in a lump sum like this, that offers a significant immediate financial boost, a real advantage.
It clearly highlights that the impact of these payments is very real and hopefully very positive for the individuals and families getting them. So, okay, we've established the immense scale of the money flowing right now, confirmed by officials. But the next big question is, obviously, why? Why is all this happening? These aren't just random payments showing up out of the blue. There's a very specific reason for this financial benefit.
Absolutely. And the source is very, very clear on this point. These substantial back payments, they are not the result of, say, a general cost of living increase or a typical annual adjustment. Nothing like that.
Okay, so not COLA related.
No. They are a direct and specific consequence of one particular piece of legislation, a law that recently came into effect. And that legislation is the Social Security Fairness Act.
Ah, the Social Security Fairness Act. Okay, that's the key, according to our source. That's the trigger for all this. Can you walk us through its journey? How did it become law, as the source describes it?
Certainly. The source details the legislative path it took. It passed through the House of Representatives late last year. Specifically, the source mentions November.
Okay, House passed it in November.
Following that, it moved over to the Senate, where it also passed. That was in December.
Senate passed in December. Got it.
And then the final crucial step, as noted in the source, was when it was signed into law by the president. That happened on January 5th of this year.
January 5th, 2025. So fairly recent.
Yes. The source even mentions there was a signing ceremony, which just underscores the formal, official nature of this legislative change. It wasn't slipped through quietly.
Okay, so it's a relatively new law, signed just a few months back.
Yeah.
But how did this specific law lead to billions of dollars in back payments and these really large average checks? What did the Social Security Fairness Act actually do at its core, based on what our source tells us?
Right. This is the absolute crucial detail. This unlocks the why behind these payments, according to the source. The Social Security Fairness Act, it didn't create some brand new program or add a general benefit across the board.
Okay.
Instead, it specifically and intentionally repealed two long-standing provisions that were already part of Social Security law, two specific rules.
Got rid of two old rules. Which ones?
These two provisions are known as the windfall elimination provision, or WEP,
The WEP.
and the government pension offset, or GPO.
WEP and GPO. Got it. Those names sound pretty official. And the source said they were long-standing. How long exactly were they around based on what we learned?
The source gives us some specific historical context here. It states that both WP and GPO had been in effect for a really considerable amount of time. The source notes they were put in place back in the early 1980s and the late 1970s. It specifically mentions 1977 for one and the early 80s for the other.
Wow. So 1977, early 80s. We're talking, what, roughly 40 to 50 years these rules were active?
Approximately, yes, decades. They've been part of the Social Security system for a long, long time.
40 or 50 years.
Yeah.
That's a huge chunk of history. And for all that time, what impact were WEP and GPO having on people's Social Security checks, according to the source? What did they do?
The source is quite clear on their effect. It states that these provisions were offsetting people's benefits, or, reducing the regular monthly Social Security checks for millions of people.
Reducing benefits.
Yes. The source mentions an estimate that about 3.2 million-ish people were generally affected by these offsets over the many years they were in place.
3.2 million.
Roughly, yeah. And without going beyond our source, the names themselves, windfall elimination, government pension offset, and the description of offsetting benefits implies they were designed to adjust or, yes, reduce Social Security benefits for individuals who also received certain other types of income, particularly pensions from government jobs where they didn't pay Social Security taxes.
Okay, so for potentially millions of people over like 4 or 5 decades, these two rules, WEP and GPO, were causing their Social Security checks to be lower than they otherwise might have been. And now this new law, the Social Security Fairness Act, has just wiped them out, gotten rid of them.
Precisely. Eliminated them. And the source emphasizes this direct causal link. The repeal of these two specific, long-standing provisions, WEP and GPO, that is the fundamental and direct reason why the beneficiaries who were previously affected by them,
The 3.2 million-ish.
potentially that group, yes, why they are now entitled to receive higher monthly payments going forward, and crucially, why they are receiving these significant lump sum back payments now.
Okay.
The Act effectively reversed those offsets. It made beneficiaries eligible for the full amount they should have been getting, and it did so looking backwards in time as well. This is the core of the financial benefit, the extra money we're seeing delivered right now.
That connects the dots perfectly. So a specific new law comes along, gets rid of two old rules that were lowering benefits for certain people for decades. Now those rules are gone. Those people are getting more money each month, plus they're getting a lump sum for the money they should have been getting in the past. This really highlights the positive impact, the benefit of the Fairness Act for this specific group.
It does. It's framed in the source as correcting the amount due based on the new legal standards set by the repeal, delivering the proper benefit.
Okay, fantastic. So we understand the huge amounts of money involved, the billions. We understand this specific legislative reason getting rid of WEP and GPO. That leads us straight to the next obvious question. Who exactly are these beneficiaries? Which specific group of people is receiving all this money?
Right. So based on the source, the payments are going specifically to the beneficiaries who were previously impacted by those WEP and GPO provisions, the ones that just got repealed by the Social Security Fairness Act.
Oh.
We mentioned earlier that the source estimated around 3.2 million-ish people were generally affected by those offsets over the years they existed.
So is it all 3.2 million of those folks who are getting these big back payments right now?
Not necessarily all of them at this exact moment or getting the back payments specifically based on the source's description. The back payments, these lump sums we're talking about, are specifically for the subset of those beneficiaries who, because the repeal was made retroactive, and that's a key point we really need to expand on in a bit.
Okay, retroactivity is important.
Very. Because of that retroactivity, they were due money they should have been getting in their past monthly checks, going back in time. It's those individuals whose past benefit calculations literally changed because WEP and GPO were effectively removed from the equation for that past period.
Gotcha. So it's the ones affected by the repeal and owed money from the past because of that repeal. And does our source give a specific number for the people who are still waiting for their payment in this current round of distribution?
Yes, it does provide that figure. As of the context provided in the source material, approximately 900,000 people are still awaiting their lump sum back payment.
900,000. Wow, that's still a lot of people. Just under 1 million individuals still in the queue to receive this benefit.
It's a significant number still being processed, yes.
Okay, 900,000 people still waiting. If, as the source said, over $15 billion has already gone out relatively quickly to millions of others, why are these remaining payments for these 900,000 taking a bit longer? What's the holdup according to the source?
The source gives us the explicit reason for that delay. It states pretty clearly that these remaining payments require manual processing.
Manual processing. Seriously.
Yeah.
In this day and age, for a government agency dealing with billions, that sounds challenging, time-consuming.
That's what the source indicates, yes. It highlights that these particular calculations and the subsequent distributions for these remaining 900,000 beneficiaries, they're complex enough that they apparently can't just be handled by the automated systems. They require actual human review, human calculation. The source even mentions that staff from other departments, other sectors within Social Security, are apparently being pulled off their regular duties or reassigned specifically to prioritize the processing and distribution of these specific manual payments.
So they're pulling people in to focus on this.
That's the implication. To prioritize getting this money out for the roughly 900,000 individuals still waiting, it underscores the agency's focus on completing this distribution, even though the process is clearly labor-intensive for this final group.
Okay, so the delay for this group, it isn't like a funding problem where they forgot about them. It's purely down to the administrative complexity, the nitty-gritty of calculating these specific retroactive amounts for almost 1 million people, one by one essentially.
That seems to be the explanation provided.
It shows that while the overall process is massive and largely automated, this final stage requires some real personalized attention to get the numbers right for each individual.
Exactly. It's described as a manual effort being prioritized to ensure these beneficiaries receive the correct amounts they are now legally due under the new law, covering that specific retroactive period, making sure the benefit is calculated properly.
That brings us perfectly to the whole concept of back pay and retroactive payment. We've been using those terms, but let's really unpack what they mean in this specific context based on the source's explanation. Because this is crucial for understanding why the lump sums are so big, right? Why people are getting thousands.
This is absolutely a key piece of the puzzle. So remember, the Social Security Fairness Act itself was signed into law by the president on January 5th of this year, 2025, which, feels relatively recent.
Yeah, less than a year ago. Feels like just yesterday sometimes.
Right. But the critical detail, the absolute game changer from the source, is that the act didn't just start applying from January 5th onward. No, it was specifically written to be retroactive. And retroactive all the way back to January of last year, January 2024.
Whoa, hang on. So the law changed this year, January 2025, but it acts as if the change actually happened way back at the beginning of last year, January 2024.
Yep.
That's quite a jump back in time. Like over a full year before it was even signed.
Precisely. A significant look-back period. And that retroactive application is what generates these significant back payments.
Right.
The source describes these retroactive payments in really clear, simple terms. They are literally catching people up.
Catching people up, okay.
Catching them up on the money they should have been receiving in their regular monthly benefit checks, going all the way back to January of last year, 2024. Because the repeal of WAP and GPO now applies to that entire period, the amount these beneficiaries were supposed to be paid each month under these new rules was higher than what they actually received at the time because the old offset rules were still technically in place then.
Catching people up. Yeah, I like that. It's a really tangible way to put it. So they were getting amount X each month, but the law came along later and basically said, no, for all those months going back to January of 24, you were actually entitled to amount Y, which is higher.
Exactly. That's the essence of it. And the large lump sum payment people are getting now, it isn't some random bonus or extra stimulus. It's simply the accumulation of that difference. The difference between amount Y, what they should have gotten, and amount X, what they did get, calculated month by month over all the months from January of last year right up until the date their back payment is finally issued.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's the sum of all those monthly shortfalls.
Yeah.
And the source gives an example, right, based on an average figure to help illustrate how this adds up.
Yes, it does. The source mentions that on average, the monthly amount these beneficiaries should have been getting more, that difference between amount Y and amount X after the repeal was factored in was about $360 a month.
$360 more per month on average.
Correct, as an average monthly increase they were due. So to calculate the big lump sum back payment, you essentially take that average monthly difference, around $360, and you multiply it by the total number of months that have passed since January of last year, 2024, up to the point the payment is actually processed and sent out.
Wow. Okay, let's do some quick math. So if someone's payment is being processed now, let's say it's June or July of 2025, that's already, like 18 or 19 months since January 2024?
Roughly, yes,
Right.
Depending on the exact processing date.
Okay, so $360 times, let's say, 18 months.
Yeah.
That gets you right around $6,480. Times 19 months is over $6,800. It really does add up quickly to those average figures we were talking about, that $6,710.
It absolutely does, and that's precisely how these large lump sums, averaging over $6,700, are being generated. It's not some new extra benefit being created out of thin air. It's the calculated delivery of the cumulative amount of money that was already due to these specific beneficiaries for that entire retroactive period, based purely on the legislative change making the repeal effective back then. The source consistently frames these large payments as a positive correction. It's ensuring individuals receive the full financial benefit they are entitled to under the new law, covering that whole retroactive time frame, delivering what was owed.
It really underscores that this is about getting money that was rightfully theirs, just delayed in delivery until the law changed and the complex calculations could finally be made. It's a significant financial benefit that just happened to accumulate over time because of that look back.
It is. It's the tangible monetary result of the Fairness Act, applying its core provisions, the repeal of WEP and GPO, backward in time.
Okay, makes perfect sense. So we've covered the huge scale, billions of dollars, the legislative reason, repealing WPGPO via the Fairness Act, who's getting it, those previously offset by WPGPO, and the mechanism retroactive back pay, catching people up by accumulating those monthly differences since January of last year. Now let's talk timeline. For those remaining 900,000 people, the ones needing manual processing, when can they actually expect to receive their payments? What did the source say?
The source provides a very specific and I'd say encouraging timeline on this, coming directly from the Social Security Acting Commissioner. The expectation, the target, is for all of these payments to be completely distributed to those remaining 900,000 people by the end of this month.
By the end of this month. Seriously, that's really soon, like within weeks.
Yes. The source, given its context date when the information was gathered, describes this time frame as being completed in the next 3 weeks. So the vast majority, perhaps even all, of these final manually processed payments are expected to be sent out very, very shortly, bringing this specific phase of distribution to a close.
Wow, that is excellent news for the nearly 1 million people who are still waiting. It signals that this huge, complex process of distributing all the accumulated back pay from the Fairness Act is finally nearing its conclusion. That benefit is almost there.
It certainly seems so. The source conveys a sense that wrapping up this particular phase, distributing these specific payments related to the WAP-GPO repeal, it's a high priority, and it's expected to be completed soon, which presumably will allow Social Security to finalize this aspect of the Act's implementation and maybe move on to other things.
Okay. Now, here's a really interesting twist almost that the source raises. It's like a consequence of that manual processing delay we talked about. It speculates, or maybe anticipates, the potential for the average payment amount to actually increase for those folks who receive their payments later in this final wave.
Yes, this is a fascinating observation. It's derived directly from the logistics of the situation, the mechanics of how this is playing out, the reasoning provided in the source for this potential increase in the average payment. It's directly linked to that manual processing delay we just discussed.
How does that work? How does a delay mean more money?
Well, think back to how the back pay is calculated. We just covered it, right? It's that monthly difference they were due around $360 on average, maybe more, maybe less for individuals, multiplied by the total number of months since January of last year, 2024.
Right. Number of months is key.
Exactly. So the longer it takes for Social Security to manually process and finally send out these payments, the more additional months of back pay naturally accumulate for that individual beneficiary who's still waiting.
Ah, I see. So if someone gets their payment processed right at the end of this month, maybe even spilling slightly into next month if there are a few final stragglers, they've automatically accumulated another month, maybe even 2 months, of that $360 difference compared to someone whose payment was processed and sent out months ago.
Precisely. So just by default, the lump sum amount for beneficiaries receiving their payment later in this process will be calculated over a slightly longer retroactive period. More months equals more accumulated back pay. This naturally leads to the potential, even the likelihood, of a larger average check for this later group compared to the earlier recipients.
That makes perfect mathematical sense. It's almost like an unintended bonus for waiting. The very delay caused by the necessary manual processing, while maybe frustrating for some who are eager for the money, is actually adding to the total amount of retroactive benefit being accumulated for those still in the queue. More money in the end.
That's the logical outcome, yes.
And the source even includes some speculative but reasoned higher average figures they anticipate seeing because of this.
It does. Based on this logic, this mechanism, and the ongoing timeline pushing payments towards the end of the month or maybe slightly beyond, the source mentions the possibility that the final average lump sum back payment could potentially rise noticeably above that initial $6,710 figure we started with.
How high?
It speculates we might see averages climb to figures like $6,822, or potentially even significantly higher figures, maybe reaching averages closer to $7,800 for this final cohort.
Wow, an average potentially rising towards $7,800. That would be a really substantial increase from the initial average reported earlier, a much bigger benefit.
It would be quite significant, yes. The source presents this as a reasonable anticipation, grounded in the mechanics of the retroactive calculation and the reality of the ongoing manual processing timeline. It's not presented as a guaranteed number, of course, but as a logical expectation, given that more months of benefits are simply accumulating for those still awaiting payment. It's definitely a noteworthy point, highlighting that even an administrative delay can, in this specific scenario, translate directly to a larger cumulative financial benefit being delivered in the end. More money received.
Okay, so for those remaining 900,000 people, the key takeaways are the wait is almost over, payments expected by the end of this month. And the silver lining, maybe, of that necessary manual processing delay is the real potential for a larger average check when it does arrive, simply due to more months of back pay being included. That's a fascinating detail drawn straight from the source's analysis of the situation.
It is indeed. And the source, importantly, assures us that they will continue to monitor the situation. They'll share any further official announcements or confirmed shifts in these numbers as Social Security releases them, which just reinforces the value of staying informed, on the specific outcomes of major legislative changes and the administrative processes like this one, how policy turns into dollars.
Which is exactly what this deep dive is designed to provide for you, keeping you informed with the essential details, the context, straight from the source, making sense of these big financial shifts. Okay, so let's just quickly wrap this up, recap this really extensive deep dive into these significant Social Security back payments that are happening right now. We have confirmed, based on our source, that massive amounts of money are indeed flowing, billions. Individual payments averaging $6,710 initially, billions already distributed, and billions more expected very, very soon.
And we know this large-scale financial benefit, this extra money, is happening specifically because of the Social Security Fairness Act. That's the law signed this year. But critically, its effects were made retroactive all the way back to January of last year, 2024. And its core function was repealing those long-standing WEP and GPO provisions that had previously offset or reduced benefits for certain people.
Right. And these substantial payments, these thousands of dollars, are going directly to the beneficiaries who were previously impacted by that repeal. It represents the money they actually should have been receiving month after month since last year, now being delivered all at once in a lump sum to sort of catch them up financially.
And while millions have already received their payments, we learned that approximately 900,000 beneficiaries are still awaiting theirs. This is primarily due to the need for complex manual processing for their specific cases. However, the good news from official sources is the expectation to have these payments completely distributed by the end of this month, essentially within the next few weeks.
And perhaps the most intriguing detail for those still waiting, the source points out that the very delay caused by that necessary manual processing could mean the average check for this final group of recipients actually ends up being higher, potentially climbing towards $7,000, maybe even closer to $7,800 on average, simply because more months of that retroactive back pay will have accumulated by the time their payment is finally calculated and issued. A bigger benefit in the end.
So based directly on the source material we've explored together today, you should now have a pretty clear and detailed understanding of this specific, very important financial development. You know the immense scale of the money involved, the precise legislative cause behind it, the identity of the recipients, the mechanics of how that lump sum benefit is calculated through retroactivity, and the timeline for completion, including that interesting potential for a higher average payment for those whose processing takes longest. It distills some complex information into the key understandable points about a significant financial benefit being delivered right now.
It truly does. It really shows how a specific legislative change, something focused on seemingly technical provisions like WEP and GPO, can translate into such tangible, significant financial impacts for people, delivering thousands of dollars in accumulated benefits directly into millions of individual lives. A huge positive change for those affected.
And maybe a final thought building on that.
All right.
It encourages us to consider how the administrative processes themselves, the things needed to actually implement such changes, like needing manual review for almost 1 million people in this case, how those processes can themselves influence not just the timing, but potentially even the final size of the financial benefit delivered.
Yeah, that's a great point. That the length of the processing queue, the time it takes to work through it, can, in this specific instance anyway, actually mean receiving a larger sum of money that was rightfully due all along. It's counterintuitive, maybe, but fascinating.
It really is. It's a powerful illustration, perhaps, of the ripple effect of policy changes on personal finances, and also the complex, sometimes very human-intensive machinery required to make those financial benefits a reality for everyone entitled to them. Something certainly...
Okay, let's kick this off. Imagine this. You check your bank account, maybe expecting your usual Social Security deposit, but then you see something extra.
Something significantly extra.
Exactly. A big lump sum, maybe thousands of dollars just sitting there, unexpected.
Yeah.
Wow, for millions of people right now, that's not just imagination, it's actually happening.
It really is. We're seeing this huge wave of payments.
Huge is right. We're talking billions with a B. Billions of dollars flowing out from Social Security.
And it's translating into really substantial individual payments. What's the average figure we saw?
Well over $6,700 average per person.
Wow. That's a significant amount of money arriving all at once, a real boost.
Absolutely. A major financial event bringing, real tangible benefits to folks receiving it.
And what's really interesting here, I think, beyond just the dollar figures,
Which are impressive on their own.
definitely impressive, but it's the why. Why now? Why these specific people? It's all tied to a legislative change.
Right. It's not random. There's a whole backstory involving changes to some pretty long-standing rules.
It's quite a story, actually, a culmination of efforts.
So that's what we're doing in this deep dive. We've got this recent explanation laying out these payments, these financial benefits.
Yeah, our source material seems pretty detailed.
It is. So our mission today is really to unpack all of this. What exactly are these back payments? Why are they happening now?
Who's getting this money? Like, who specifically benefits?
Precisely. And how much money are we talking about in total? What's the timeline for everyone getting paid?
And we really want to zero in on the financial upside for the people receiving this, right? The positive impact.
Absolutely. We're focusing relentlessly on the significant financial benefits being delivered, more money in people's pockets.
And just to be clear, like you said, this is real money. It's happening now.
Confirmed funds, not just, talk or projections. The money is actively moving.
And the figures, the numbers we're discussing, they're coming straight from official sources, from the Social Security Administration itself.
Okay, so let's jump right into those numbers then. The scale of this financial distribution, it's honestly kind of staggering when you look at it.
It really is. Our source confirms the amount that's already gone out the door.
Okay, what's that figure?
The Social Security Administration has already sent out $15.3 billion in these specific back payments.
$15.3 billion already paid out. That's hard to wrap your head around.
It's a massive sum, but like you said earlier, what makes it really hit home is the individual impact.
Right. How does that break down per person? Because $15 billion is huge, but what does it mean for the folks getting the checks?
Well, the source gives us that average payment amount per person who's received it so far.
And that was?
A very significant $6,710 on average.
$6,710. That's not just a minor adjustment or a few extra bucks. That's a substantial chunk of money arriving as a lump sum.
For sure. I mean, for a lot of people, $6,700 is, several months' worth of expenses, maybe more. It's a powerful financial benefit.
A really meaningful amount.
Yep.
And these figures, they're confirmed by Social Security leadership, right?
Yes. The acting commissioner, Frank Bisagno, he's spoken about these payments. He's acknowledged this distribution.
So solid information. And incredibly, that $15.3 billion isn't even the end of it.
Not at all. They're still going. There's another big chunk of money scheduled to go out very soon.
How much more are we talking about?
Approximately another $6 billion, give or take. Scheduled for distribution this month.
This month. So very imminent.
That's the plan, yes, for another group of beneficiaries.
Okay, so let's add that up. You've got $15.3 billion already out, plus another $6 billion going out now.
That brings the total for this whole initiative to well over $21 billion.
Wow. Over $21 billion just for these specific back payments related to this one legislative change.
It really puts the scale into perspective, doesn't it? It underscores that this is a major financial correction.
A huge undertaking by Social Security to get this money out.
Definitely. And again, this comes from the top. Acting Commissioner Bisagno has talked about the agency making this happen, implementing the changes.
He's emphasized it's a priority.
Yes, that getting these funds delivered correctly and promptly is a key operational focus for them right now.
Okay, so the scale is massive. What about the number of people impacted? Who's actually seeing this benefit?
Well, millions have already received their payments. The source doesn't give an exact paid so far number.
Okay.
But it does give context. It mentions the total number of people who were affected by the old rules that got changed.
Ah, the group that should be getting these payments. How many was that?
That number was somewhere in the range of 3 to 3.2 million people, approximately.
3 to 3.2 million. So that's the pool of beneficiaries this whole $21 billion distribution is targeted towards.
Precisely. These are the folks whose Social Security checks were calculated differently, lower because of rules that don't exist anymore.
Rules that have been repealed.
Exactly. And out of that 3 million plus group, while many have gotten paid,
There are still some waiting.
yes, about 900,000 people are still due to receive their payment, just under 1 million individuals.
900,000 people still waiting for this average payment of over $6,700, maybe more. That's still a lot of people.
It is a lot of people, but you have to remember, in the grand scheme of Social Security.
Right. Tens of millions receive benefits overall.
Exactly. So, as the source points out, this group of 900,000 is actually a very small percentage of total beneficiaries.
Okay, context is important. But for those 900,000 people,
Oh, for them, it's absolutely critical. It's a significant expected financial benefit that's on its way.
and it's crucial to understand this isn't some kind of lottery win or random bonus.
Yeah, no, the source is clear on that. They use the phrase, not like pulling rabbits out of a hat.
Right. There's a solid reason, a legal basis for all this money flowing.
A very specific legislative foundation. It all comes back to a change in the law.
Okay, so let's pivot to that. The why. What's the origin story here? What specific law made this happen?
The driving force behind these really substantial back payments is the Social Security Fairness Act.
The Social Security Fairness Act. Okay, that name probably rings a bell for folks who follow retirement policy. It was debated for a long time.
It was years of discussion around it, but its passage is what directly led to this money, this financial boost reaching people now.
So take us through how it became law. What was its journey?
Well, it made its way through Congress pretty recently. It passed the House of Representatives late last year.
When was that?
In November. Then it went over to the Senate.
And passed there too.
Yes, the Senate passed it in December. So pretty quick succession there at the end of the year.
And then the final step,
The president signed it into law on January 5th of this year.
January 5th, 2024. That's when it officially became law.
That's the date. Our source mentions the signing ceremony, actually.
Anything exciting?
Apparently not. The source describes it as pretty boring.
Huh. Okay, well, maybe the ceremony was low-key, but the impact of that signature certainly hasn't been boring for the millions benefiting.
Not at all. That signature was the key. It fundamentally changed things for this specific group of Social Security beneficiaries.
So what did the act do? What was the core change that triggered these payments?
The main action, the reason we're seeing these checks, is that the Social Security Fairness Act repealed two specific, long-standing provisions in the Social Security system.
Repealed them. Got rid of them completely.
Yes. Wiped them off the books, essentially.
And these were provisions that had been around for a while, reducing benefits for some people.
Exactly. The Act repealed the windfall elimination provision, people usually call it WEP.
WEP, right.
And a government pension offset, or GPO.
WEP and GPO.
Okay.
And you said long-standing. How long are we talking?
Decades. These weren't new rules they just tweaked. They were put in place way back in the late 1970s and early 1980s.
Wow, so like 1977 for one, early 80s for the other?
Yeah, that's right. So they were actively affecting benefit calculations for, roughly 40, maybe even closer to 50 years for some folks.
40 to 50 years, these rules were lowering payments for certain people.
Yes. And that group we mentioned earlier, the 3 to 3.2 million people.
Yeah.
Those are the beneficiaries whose Social Security checks were being reduced or offset specifically because of WEP and GPO.
So the Fairness Act getting rid of WEP and GPO is the direct cause.
It's the direct cause of these back payments, and the fact that this group will now receive higher monthly benefits going forward. It's a double benefit, really.
Higher checks from now on, plus this big lump sum catch-up payment? Okay, that makes sense. But let's dig into that back payment part more. It's not just about future increases.
Absolutely. The term back pay or, retroactive payment, that's really key here.
Because the law wasn't signed until January this year.
Right, January 5th. But its effect on payments reaches back further in time.
How far back?
It goes back to January 1st of last year, January 2023.
Okay, wait. So the law passed this January, but it effectively changes payments starting from January 2023, over a year earlier.
Exactly. That's the retroactive part. Legally, it's like WEP and GPO shouldn't have been applied to reduce benefits for this group starting way back on January 1st, 2023.
Even though the law wasn't actually passed until a year later.
Correct. That's the power of making legislation retroactive.
So because those rules were repealed retroactively, the people affected should have been getting more money each month, all the way back to the start of last year.
That's the core idea. They should have been receiving a higher monthly Social Security check from January 2023 onwards, reflecting the repeal of WEP and GPO.
But they didn't, because the law hadn't passed yet. They were still getting the lower amount based on the old rules.
Precisely. They received the amount calculated under WEP and GPO for all those months.
So Social Security basically owes them the difference for every single month since January 2023.
That's exactly how these large lump sums are calculated. It's the catch-up.
Okay, how does that math work?
They figure out how much more you should have gotten each month without the WEP GPO reduction. Let's say, just hypothetically, it was $300 more per month.
Okay.
Then they count how many months pass between January 2023 and when they issue your back payment. Maybe it's 18 months.
Right.
So they multiply that monthly difference, the $300, by the number of months 18. And that total is your lump sum back payment.
The total amount you were underpaid during that retroactive period?
Exactly. And the source actually gives an average figure for that monthly difference caused by WEP and GPO.
Oh, okay. What was the average amount people were missing out on each month?
On average, according to the source, it was around $360 a month.
$360 a month on average that people should have gotten but didn't because of WEP and GPO.
That's the average monthly underpayment amount that's now being corrected.
Okay, let's run those numbers again with the average. $360 a month, starting January 2023. If someone gets their payment now, say June 2024.
That's about 18 months, yeah. January 23 through June 24.
So $360 times 18 months.
Let's see, that's $6,480. Right. And remember, the average lump sum payment reported so far.
$6,710.
See how close that is? The calculation based on the average monthly difference gets you right in the ballpark.
Yeah, it totally tracks. The slightly higher actual average probably reflects, variations in individual cases or maybe payments going out a bit later.
Exactly. But it clearly shows how multiplying that monthly benefit increase over the retroactive period generates these really significant lump sum payments. People are getting the money they were entitled to under the new law, just delayed.
It's Social Security making things right financially, based on the Fairness Act, delivering that accumulated benefit all at once.
A major financial catch-up for millions.
Okay, so we've got the scale, 21B plus total, $6,700 plus average. The why, Fairness Act repealing WUP-GPO, and the how, retroactive calculation back to Jan 23. Let's just nail down again who is getting this benefit.
Right. To be crystal clear, the recipients are only those Social Security beneficiaries whose payments were previously lowered because of the windfall elimination provision, WEP, or the government pension offset, GPO.
So if you had, say, a pension from a government job where you didn't pay Social Security taxes, that might have triggered WEP or GPO and lowered your Social Security benefit.
Correct. Or certain types of other non-covered employment could trigger it. If WEP or GPO applied to you, reducing your check.
Then you're in the group getting this back pay and the higher monthly amount going forward.
That's the group. And we know millions from this group have already gotten paid.
But not everyone yet. We mentioned about 900,000 still waiting.
Yes, that's the number cited in our source. Approximately 900,000 eligible individuals are still awaiting their retroactive payment.
Nearly 1 million people anticipating what could be, $6,700 or potentially more. That's a lot of financial relief still pending.
It is. And while, again, it's a small slice of the overall Social Security pie.
For those 900,000 families, it's huge.
Absolutely huge. And the source gives us a clue about why their payments might be taking a bit longer.
Yeah. Why the delay for this last group? Why couldn't they just process all 3 million or so at once?
It seems it's down to the complexity of the cases. The source says these remaining payments require manual processing.
Manual processing, so not automated.
Apparently not entirely. It suggests that for these specific cases, someone actually has to, review the file, calculate the adjustment, verify everything by hand, essentially.
That sounds intensive
And
time-consuming.
It likely is, which explains why it might take longer than a simple system-wide update. The source actually mentions the agency is putting extra resources on this.
Like what?
It says staff are being pulled from other tasks, other sectors within Social Security, specifically to focus on getting these manual WEP GPO back payments processed and out the door.
So they're prioritizing it, shifting people around to clear this backlog.
That's what the source indicates, yes. A real push to get it done.
That's good to hear. Shows they're serious about delivering these benefits.
Yeah.
And is there a timeline? When can these 900,000 people expect the money?
There is a target. According to what the agency has told our source, the goal is to have all of these remaining payments sent out by the end of this month.
By the end of this month. So within the next, couple of weeks?
Based on the timing, yes. That seems to be the window they're aiming for.
Okay, that's definite light at the end of the tunnel for those still waiting. The process should wrap up very soon.
It's a positive sign, indicating the conclusion of this whole back payment distribution effort is near.
Now, something else interesting you mentioned related to that average payment. The $6,710 figure.
Yes. The possibility that the average might actually go up.
How would that happen?
Well, it's based on the timing, really. Think about the calculation we just discussed.
The monthly difference times the number of months since January 2023.
Exactly. The longer someone has to wait for their payment, the more months have passed since January 2023.
Right. So if you got your payment back in, say, March.
You got about 14 or 15 months worth of back pay.
But if you're in this last group of 900,000 getting paid now, at the end of June.
You've accumulated about 18 months worth of that difference, maybe even 19, depending on the exact date.
So the people getting paid later are actually getting more months included in their calculation.
Precisely. Their individual lump sums will naturally be larger on average than the lump sums paid out earlier in the year, simply because more time has passed.
And because this last batch of payments is likely to be larger per person.
It's expected to pull the overall average up once all the payments are accounted for.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The later payments drag the average higher.
That's the logic presented in the source. It anticipates that the final, official average payment size, calculated across everyone who received one, will likely be higher than the $6,710 reported based on the earlier distributions.
Did this source speculate on how much higher it might go?
It did throw out a potential number. It suggested we might see future reports indicating a final average payment size potentially reaching around $7,800.
Wow, $7,800 on average. That's a significant jump from $6,710.
It is. It's presented as a possibility based on this timing factor. Definitely something to keep an eye out for in future Social Security updates. It really highlights the growing financial benefit for those whose processing took a bit longer.
Yeah, an unexpected silver lining to waiting longer, perhaps. getting a bigger check in the end.
Potentially, yes. It further emphasizes just how substantial this financial correction is for the people impacted by the repeal of WEP and GPO.
It really is a story about correcting past reductions and delivering significant, tangible financial benefits, both now and for the future.
Absolutely. The lump sum is the immediate catch-up, and the higher monthly checks are the ongoing benefit from the Fairness Act.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up then. We've taken a deep dive into these major Social Security back payments.
And the numbers are just huge. Over $15 billion already paid, another $6 billion coming this month.
Resulting in average lump sums over $6,700, possibly heading towards $7,800. A massive financial boost for recipients.
All stemming from the Social Security Fairness Act, which finally repealed those old WEP and GPO provisions.
Provisions that had been lowering benefits for millions for like 40-plus years.
And the payments are retroactive, catching people up financially all the way back to January of last year. It's about making people whole.
Delivering the money they should have received month after month since then, all in one go.
And while millions have their money, the process is nearing the finish line for the last group of about 900,000 people.
With the agency pushing hard to get those payments out by the end of this month.
It's a really significant positive financial event for this specific group of beneficiaries.
It really is. So thinking about this whole picture, the decades-old rules, the legislative change, the massive $21 billion plus correction delivering substantial benefits, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
What are you thinking?
Well, just considering the scale of this payout, over $21 billion concentrated among roughly 3 million people, what kind of ripple effect might that kind of targeted financial infusion have, not just for the individuals finally getting the benefits they were due, but maybe even more broadly? What does that sudden arrival of funds enable for those folks?
That's a great question. Receiving several $1,000s unexpectedly, does that go straight to paying down debt, fixing the car, maybe a down payment, or just easing daily financial pressures? Thinking about the collective impact of $21 billion landing in the accounts of retirees and beneficiaries over just a few months, it really highlights the direct connection between policy changes and people's everyday. Okay, let's jump right into the deep dive.
Let's do it.
If you've been hearing whispers, maybe seeing some headlines buzzing around, or even just personally wondering about what seems like a massive flow of money moving through Social Security right now, maybe involving some pretty significant lump sum payments, you are definitely in the right place today.
Yeah, there's absolutely a ton of buzz, isn't there?
Yeah.
Lots of questions.
Exactly. And for millions, there's this, real sense of excitement, anticipation about payments arriving, wondering exactly how much more benefit they could actually be getting, maybe even like a double payment feeling.
It really is more than just buzz, though. What we're seeing, based on all the material we've gathered, is a very real, tangible financial event. It's impacting millions of Americans right now.
And you've gathered quite a stack for this deep dive.
Oh, yeah. We've got official statements, detailed articles, research notes, a whole collection. And they all confirm, like unequivocally, that these payments are real, they're happening now, and the scale is, well, it's pretty remarkable.
Okay, so that's our mission today, right? We're going to take all that source material, cut through any noise or confusion, and just pull out the essential facts. We want to explain, as clearly as we can, exactly what these payments are, why they're happening now, who's getting them, and maybe most importantly for a lot of folks, what are the direct financial benefits?
Right. The focus is definitely on the increased payments, the enhanced benefits, how much more money people are actually receiving.
Yeah, we want you to walk away really understanding the full picture of this financial uplift that's happening for these individuals.
And when we talk about scale, I mean, the numbers are serious. The sources confirm billions with a B have already moved.
With billions already.
Yes, and billions more are earmarked to go out very, very soon, like this month.
Wow. And for the person actually getting a check, what does that look like?
We're looking at average payment amounts that are pretty substantial, enough to really make a difference for someone. Think thousands of dollars on average.
Thousands on average. Billions already out the door. Okay, yeah, this definitely sounds like a deep dive we need to take. Let's unpack this.
Absolutely, let's do it. So the very first thing I think we need to nail down, based on everything we've seen, is that this isn't, a rumor or just speculation.
Right. It's confirmed.
It's confirmed. These Social Security back payments are a concrete reality.
Huh.
We have confirmation directly from high levels within the Social Security Administration itself.
Like who?
Well, The acting commissioner, Frank Bisignano, he's recently spoken publicly about this, gave official confirmation that, yeah, everything being reported is factually based. This isn't some, fringe story. It's confirmed right from the top.
Okay, that official confirmation is huge. It grounds everything. So it's real. Now, just how big is this operation? What are the actual numbers involved here?
The scale is, honestly, it's pretty impressive. Gives you a sense of the administrative effort involved, too. According to the figures cited in our sources, over $15 billion has already been distributed.
$15 billion.
Mm-hmm. To be specific, the number you see most often is $15.3 billion. That amount has already gone out, reached millions of beneficiaries across the country.
Wow. $15.3 billion already dispersed. That's just a staggering amount of money already in people's hands.
It really is. I mean, to put that in perspective, that kind of money transfer, it's larger than the annual GDP of quite a few small nations.
That's a great way to think about it. But the sources suggest that's not the end, right? There's still more money set to go out.
That's correct, yeah. The distribution process, even though it's already moved this huge sum, it isn't finished yet.
Okay.
The sources indicate there's still a significant amount scheduled to be sent out specifically this month, June.
This month, how much are we talking about?
We're talking about approximately another $6 billion.
So $6 billion more just this month.
Yep. So you add that to the $15.3 billion already paid, you're looking at roughly $6 billion more reaching beneficiaries very, very soon.
So grand total, we're looking at over $21 billion when this month wraps up. That's just incredible scale. Okay, let's zoom in a bit. From the billions down to the individual person. What does this actually mean for someone getting one of these payments? What's the typical amount, the average?
Right. And this is where it gets really personal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The impact on the beneficiary. The official info from Social Security, which is highlighted in our source material, it confirms the average back pay retroactive payment is $6,710.
Wait, did you say $6,710 on average as a lump sum?
That's correct.
Yeah.
$6,710. That's the average lump sum payment for those who were affected by these specific provisions that got repealed. We'll definitely get into which provisions in a moment.
Okay.
But it's really crucial to remember that's an average figure.
Right, meaning some got less, some got more.
Exactly. While some people definitely received less than that, many, many others received significantly more.
Like how much more are we talking?
Well, reports indicate some individuals have gotten payments well into 5 figures. Maybe over $20,000, depending on their specific situation, how long they were affected by the old rules.
$20,000, wow.
So you really need to think of this not as some minor adjustment, but as a really substantial lump sum payment. It's essentially a significant financial windfall, maybe long overdue, for the person receiving it.
A nearly $7,000 average, potentially much higher for some. That's a huge influx of cash for anyone. Could be absolutely life-changing for people on, tighter budgets or fixed incomes.
For sure.
Okay, so we've established millions have already received these payments, but you mentioned the process is still going, right? There are still payments going out this month. Who exactly is still waiting for this money?
Right. So while the vast majority of the people affected have gotten their payments, there is still a specific group waiting. The sources estimate this group is around 900,000 people.
900,000 people still waiting, that sounds like.
Well, that sounds like a really huge number of people. It is, yeah. It's a large number in absolute terms, definitely. But you have to put it in context. When you think about the total number of people getting Social Security benefits, that's in the tens of millions.
Ah, okay. So relative to the whole system.
Exactly. Relative to the entire Social Security beneficiary pool, 900,000 is actually a relatively small fraction. So while the number sounds big on its own, it's kind of a focused effort within this massive program.
Okay, that makes sense. Why is this specific group still waiting, though? What's the holdup?
This is key to understanding the process. The reason is these remaining payments require manual processing.
Manual processing for almost 1 million people. In this day and age, that sounds, kind of inefficient. Why isn't it automated?
That's what the sources explain, and it really speaks to the complexity of implementing this specific law change. Apparently, the existing computer systems, they just weren't set up to handle this kind of retroactive calculation across such a large, diverse group with these specific old rules involved.
So what does manual processing actually involve?
It means someone has to, go back, identify each person in this group of 900,000, review their specific earning history, their pension history if they have one,
right,
calculate the exact amount they were underpaid for every single month, going back over a year, and then figure out the total lump sum they're owed.
Wow. Doing that one by one.
For 900,000 unique cases.
Yeah.
That's a massive undertaking. And to prioritize getting these payments out the door, the sources indicate that staff are actually being pulled from other areas within the Social Security Administration.
Really?
Yeah, pulling them from other operations to focus specifically on these manual calculations and getting these checks processed. It really just highlights the sheer administrative lift needed to unwind these decades-old policies and make sure people get the money they're now legally owed.
So there are literally teams of people grinding through individual case files right now to calculate these checks for nearly 1 million folks. That's quite a picture. Is there a clear timeline? When will this manual work be done? When will these 900,000 people finally get their money?
Yes, and this is the good news, especially for those still waiting. According to the recent statements from the acting commissioner and confirmed in our source material, all the remaining payments for this specific group of 900,000, they're scheduled to be completely distributed by the end of this month.
By the end of June?
Yeah.
Seriously, that's just, what, weeks away?
Exactly. The timeline is firm. Completion by the end of June. So for the nearly 1 million people still waiting, the arrival of these, potentially substantial funds is really imminent. They won't have to wait much longer to get that significant back payment lump sum.
Okay, that's fantastic news for them. So let's just quickly recap the what and how much before we get to the why. We're seeing this huge distribution of Social Security back payments. Over $15 billion already paid out.
$15.3 billion.
Right. Another $6 billion coming just this month.
Correct.
The average lump sum payment is confirmed at $6,710, but many people are getting significantly more than that. And about 900,000 people are still waiting for their payments, which need manual processing, but they should all be out by the end of June.
You got it. That's the situation.
Okay. Now, the big question, the fundamental question, why? Why is all this money suddenly flowing? What actually triggered this whole thing?
Right. This major financial event, all these payments, they're a direct result of a specific, recent, and pretty significant piece of legislation. It's all because of the Social Security Fairness Act.
The Social Security Fairness Act. Okay, the name itself sounds like it was designed to fix something perceived as, well, unfair.
That's essentially the idea, yes.
Can you walk us through how this act came about, its legislative journey?
Sure. According to the sources, this act, or versions of it, had been kind of debated for a while. But it really gained momentum recently. It passed the House of Representatives late last year, specifically in November 2023.
Okay, passed the House in November.
Then it moved over to the Senate, passed there in December 2023.
December. Okay, moving quickly at the end of the year.
Relatively quickly, yeah, from major legislation. And then finally, it was signed into law by the president on January 5th of this year, 2024.
January 5th, 2024. Got it. So it's pretty recent law. Now, what specific parts of Social Security did this act actually change? This is the core reason for the payments, isn't it?
Precisely. This is the engine driving everything we're talking about. The Social Security Fairness Act repealed 2 specific and very long-standing provisions that had significantly impacted a particular group of Social Security beneficiaries.
2 provisions. Which ones?
They were the windfall elimination provision, most people know it as WEP.
Okay.
And the government pension offset, or GPO.
WET and GPO. Okay, those are the key acronyms here. What did these rules actually do, and how long were they around? You said long-standing.
Oh, yeah, very long-standing. Both WEP and GPO were policies that had been part of Social Security law for decades. WEP was enacted back in 1983.
Wow, okay.
And GPO was enacted even earlier in 1977.
So we're talking about rules that were impacting people for roughly 40 to 50 years.
Yeah, exactly. 40, almost 50 years. And their whole purpose, fundamentally, was to offset, or, put simply, reduce the Social Security benefit checks for individuals who also received a pension from a job where they didn't pay Social Security taxes.
Okay, hold on. Let me make sure I understand that. So if you had a job, maybe like a state government job or something, where you earned a pension but didn't pay into Social Security from that job.
Right. Non-covered employment.
Then your other Social Security benefit, maybe one you earned from a different job earlier in life, or a spouse's benefit, that benefit would be cut?
That's the essence of it, yes. That's exactly what WEP and GPO did.
Yeah.
This primarily affected certain public sector workers. Think teachers in some states, various state and local government employees, police officers, firefighters, also federal employees who were under the older civil service retirement system.
Okay, a specific group of public servants, mostly.
Generally, yes. People who often had dedicated careers in these roles earned a government pension, but didn't contribute to Social Security from that specific main career job. The WEP rule reduced their own earned Social Security benefit based on a complex formula. And the GPO rule reduced any Social Security spousal or survivor benefits they might have been eligible for, again, because they had this other non-covered government pension.
What was the original reason for putting those rules in place way back in the 70s and 80s?
Well, the argument back then when they were enacted was to prevent what Congress perceived as a kind of windfall. The idea was that these individuals who had a separate government pension and also qualified for Social Security, maybe through other work or a spouse, were getting an unfair advantage compared to someone whose entire career was in Social Security-covered employment. Whether that rationale holds up today is obviously what led to the debate and the eventual repeal.
Right. So the Fairness Act essentially said that old reasoning doesn't apply anymore, or it's unfair, and got rid of WEP and GPO.
Correct. The repeal means that for all the affected individuals, about 3.2 million people, according to estimates, their Social Security benefit will now be calculated and paid without these reductions. They're entitled to their full, unreduced benefit based on their covered earnings or their spouse's record, just like anyone else.
Okay, that makes total sense now. So for literally decades, these millions of people, like retired teachers, firefighters, state workers, they were getting less in their Social Security check than they otherwise would have simply because of WEP and GPO. The Fairness Act wipes those rules out. So logically, moving forward, their future monthly checks will be higher because the reduction is gone.
Exactly. That explains the future increase.
But to huge financial news, the thing generating all the buzz is the back payment, the big lump sum. How does repealing WEP and GPO now lead to this massive one-time payment for past months?
Yes. This is the absolute linchpin. This is the critical detail that connects the law change to these retroactive payments we're seeing.
Okay, I'm ready.
So remember, the Social Security Fairness Act was signed into law on January 5th of this year, 2024.
Right. Making the repeal effective from January 5th onward.
Well, that's what you'd normally think. But here's the crucial part, the part that makes all the difference. The Act's effective date for the repeal. It's retroactive.
Retroactive. How far back?
It goes all the way back to January 1st of last year. January 1st, 2023.
Wait, January 1st, 2023? Even though the law wasn't even passed until late 23 and wasn't signed until January 24.
Precisely. That retroactivity is the key. It's written into the law. Because the law legally states that WEP and GPO are treated as if they were never in effect starting from January 1st, 2023.
Okay.
This means that all those beneficiaries who were subject to WEP and GPO legally, they should have started receiving their higher, unreduced Social Security checks way back in January 2023.
But they didn't, right, because the law hadn't passed yet.
Exactly. Because the law hadn't actually passed, and the repeal obviously wasn't implemented yet, the Social Security Administration had to continue applying the old WEP and GPO reductions to their monthly checks throughout all of 2023 and even into the first part of 2024 until they could administratively process and implement the change required by the new law.
I see it now. Okay. So the law gave them a legal right to more money starting last January, but the system kept paying them the old lower amount for a whole year, maybe longer. So the back payment is literally Social Security saying, oops, here's all the money we should have paid you each month since January 2023, according to the new law. It's catching them up.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's corrected the record, financially speaking. Can we maybe put some numbers on that using those average figures you mentioned that might help illustrate it?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So the sources provide an estimate that on average, again, the affected beneficiaries were supposed to be getting about $360 more per month in their Social Security check once you remove the WEP and GPO reductions.
$360 more every single month. On average.
Yes, that was the estimated average monthly hit that WEP and GPO were causing on a person's benefit check. So if you just take that average monthly increase, $360, and you multiply it by the number of months that passed between January 1st, 2023, and whenever the beneficiary actually received their corrected back payment.
Okay.
That calculation gives you a rough idea of how they arrive at that large lump sum. For someone who got their payment fairly recently, say maybe in May or June of this year, they're getting roughly $360 multiplied by, what is that, 17 or 18 months?
18 months from Jan 23 to June 24.
Right, so $360 times 18 months.
Right.
So that's $6,480.
Which is really close to that $6,710 average back payment you quoted earlier.
Exactly. It lines up very closely. The back payment is direct compensation for that accumulated difference. It's literally the sum total of all those monthly amounts, like that $360 average, that they should have received but didn't, from January 2023 right up until their payment amount was finally corrected and the lump sum was issued.
That makes it crystal clear. It's not some random bonus payment.
Yeah.
It's the precise amount of their own benefits that were, you could argue, unfairly withheld for over a year because of rules that this new law retroactively wiped off the books.
Perfectly stated.
Okay, so we've really dug into the significant one-time lump sum back payment, clearly a huge financial win, a major boost for these beneficiaries. But you hinted earlier that the financial benefit isn't just this big check, right? There's more to it.
No, absolutely. It's definitely not just a one-and-done event. While that lump sum is, massive and surely very welcome for covering those past benefits, the impact of the Social Security Fairness Act actually extends permanently into the future for these folks.
Permanently? How so? What happens after the back payment arrives in their bank account?
Well, because the WEP and GPO provisions themselves have been permanently repealed by the Act. They're gone for good.
Right.
The affected beneficiaries will also receive higher monthly Social Security checks going forward, every month.
So their regular ongoing check will be bigger too?
Yes. This isn't some temporary boost. It's a permanent adjustment to their actual benefit amount calculation. Every single month from now on, their regular Social Security payment will be higher than it was before this repeal took effect.
Yeah.
They will literally see more benefit arriving in every single check they get for the rest of their lives.
Ah, okay. So the large lump sum is like getting paid back for the past underpayments.
Correct.
And the permanently higher monthly checks are the ongoing benefit of the law change for their future income. That's like a double financial uplift for this group.
Exactly. It's a two-pronged benefit. It addresses the historical underpayment, and it ensures the correct higher payment level moving forward. And interestingly, the sources we looked at even speculate that the average back payment amount for that group still waiting the $900,000 getting manual processing.
Yeah. What about them?
Their average might actually end up being higher than the $6,710 average we've seen for the millions who've already been paid.
Really? Why would the average payment go up for the people who are still waiting? Wouldn't it be the same calculation, just done later?
The reasoning presented in the source material, it's actually quite logical when you think about it. Remember, the back payment covers all the months from January 2023 until the beneficiary actually receives their check.
Okay.
For the individuals who got their payments earlier this year, maybe back in March or April, fewer months had passed since January 2023 when their check was calculated and cut.
Right. They were underpaid for fewer months.
Precisely. But for these 900,000 people who are still waiting for that manual processing, potentially getting their checks right at the end of June, well, more months are accumulating where they were paid into the old lower rate.
Ah, I see. So the period they need to be caught up for is longer.
Exactly. They were affected by the old rules for a longer duration than many of the earlier recipients. So if that average monthly increase is around $360, someone waiting until the end of June has that $360 difference adding up for maybe 18 months, whereas someone paid in March might have only had it for, say, 15 months.
Makes sense. More months times the monthly difference equals a bigger total lump sum.
Correct. Therefore, it just stands to reason that the total lump sum needed to make them whole will likely be larger, on average, for this final group. The sources actually suggest the average check for these remaining 900,000 could potentially rise, perhaps getting closer to, say, $7,800 or maybe even more. It really depends on the exact timing and the mix of individual circumstances within that group.
Wow. So for the nearly 1 million people still waiting patiently until the end of June, there's a real possibility they could receive an even larger lump sum payment than the overall average we've seen so far.
That's what the analysis suggests, yes.
And that's in addition to the permanent increase they'll see in their future monthly checks starting basically right away.
Well, that's certainly a powerful, positive financial outcome for this group. A bit of extra reward for their patience, perhaps. It is indeed. Once that manual processing wraps up, hopefully by the end of this month as planned, these individuals will have received both their substantial back payment lump sum, potentially averaging higher than the earlier group, and they will permanently benefit from those higher ongoing monthly payments because WEP and GPO are history. It really does correct what many saw as decades of unfair benefit reductions and provides a significant financial boost both now and deep into their future.
It's really quite something to see how one specific piece of legislation, especially one with a tricky retroactive clause like that, can just ripple out and translate into such massive financial consequences, billions of dollars, and also create these huge administrative tasks like manually processing nearly 1 million payments.
It really underscores the scale, doesn't it?
Yeah. The sources also, they briefly touched on some other changes happening over at the Social Security Administration. Something about implementing AI in phone systems. How does that fit into this whole picture, if at all?
Yeah, the source material mentions those other initiatives, like using AI, other modernization efforts mostly, I think, as context.
Yeah.
To paint a picture of the broader landscape within the SSA,
Okay.
it just highlights that the SSA is this enormous organization, constantly working to manage its immense scale and complexity, right? Serving tens of millions of Americans every day through call centers, online, field offices.
Yeah, a huge operation.
Exactly. So while those modernization efforts, like potentially using AI for phones, are important for improving overall service delivery down the road, our deep dive today, it's really focused squarely on the direct financial outcome for beneficiaries that resulted specifically from the Social Security Fairness Act.
Got it. So the AI stuff is just background context for now.
Pretty much. The mention of it just kind of underscores the dynamic environment at SSA and the sheer scale that requires both looking at future tech and, in this unique case, deploying significant human resources for manual work to correct these past policy impacts. But yeah, the core story here, the big news, remains those billions in back payments and the permanently higher future benefits thanks to the WEP and GPO repeal.
Okay, great clarification. So, just to hammer home the positive financial news one last time for everyone listening, millions of people affected by the old WEP and GPO rules are getting a large lump sum back payment. It's averaging over $6,700 overall, but potentially rising even higher for those still waiting until the end of June.
That's the expectation.
And this payment is specifically to compensate them for past benefits that were unfairly reduced by those now repealed rules.
Correct, catching them up.
And maybe even more importantly, for the long run, they will also continue to receive permanently higher monthly Social Security payments going forward every single month because those restrictive rules are just gone forever.
That summarizes the core financial impact beautifully. It's a really significant moment, correcting these long-standing policy reductions and providing a substantial financial boost, both immediately with the lump sum and for the rest of their retirement with the higher monthly checks.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to remember this is all based directly on the source material we've dug into.
Yes.
And it's been confirmed by high-level officials at the SSA. It's solid information.
Taking this deep dive, it really does underscore the sheer scale of these government programs, doesn't it? Like Social Security, and how these very specific, sometimes kind of dense legislative details, like an effective date, or the repeal of acronyms like WEP and GPO, how they can directly translate into incredibly real and incredibly significant financial impacts for millions and millions of individual people.
It absolutely does. And, as you reflect on all this, maybe consider what that might actually feel like. Imagine receiving one of these large, maybe unexpected, or perhaps very long-awaited lump sum payments we've been talking about, averaging over $6,700, maybe closer to $7,800 or more for some. How might a sudden influx of cash like that affect your own financial planning?
Yeah.
Or maybe help address some immediate needs you might have? Or just provide a feeling of relief and security?
That's a powerful thought. Or maybe flip it around and think about the challenge on the other side. Imagine the sheer administrative complexity involved, identifying, calculating, and then manually processing these precise back payments for almost 1 million individuals, digging into decades-old records, correcting complex formulas, ensuring every dollar is accurate. What does that really tell us about the intricate, often invisible, behind-the-scenes machinery required to manage a program as absolutely vast and vital as Social Security? It's just a logistical puzzle of immense human and financial scale.
Those are definitely powerful points to consider. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into these significant Social Security back payments. We really hope this breakdown of the source material has been informative and valuable for you.
Thanks for tuning in.
Okay, let's unpack this. There's definitely a significant amount of money flowing through the Social Security system right now, and it's creating a lot of buzz.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just talking about the regular monthly benefits people expect. We're talking about billions, literally billions, being paid out in these lump sums.
Yeah.
And for some people, this means getting money they were actually owed from, well, over a year ago. It's a pretty substantial financial event for millions.
That's absolutely right. These payments are definitely real. They are confirmed, and they represent, a considerable sum for the individuals getting them. It's a major correction, really, that's been awaited by many for a long time.
And that brings us straight into our deep dive today. We are going to really explore these recent Social Security back payments in detail.
Right.
We're not relying on guesswork or, rumors. Our insights are drawn directly from official reports, statements, including confirmation from the Social Security Acting Commissioner himself, Frank Bisignano, and also past governmental declarations.
Exactly. And our mission, really, in this deep dive is to give you a crystal clear understanding. We'll break down exactly what these payments are, pinpoint who's receiving them, explain the legislative reasons why they're happening now,
The why is key.
and quantify the immense scale of the money involved. The goal is to provide you with all the essential details without, drowning you in jargon, so you walk away truly informed.
Okay, let's get started then. So first things first, let's just confirm the reality here. This isn't just something someone might have heard through the grapevine, right? These are factual, ongoing Social Security back payments.
They absolutely are. And the confirmation, like you said, comes from the very top within the agency. The current Social Security Acting Commissioner, Frank Bisignano, he's explicitly discussed these payments in recent public statements and interviews.
Right.
And his confirmation is really vital because it validates the scale and the legitimacy of what's happening.
And the sources we're looking at, they point out that Commissioner Bisignano's discussions about these payments, they're happening during a time of pretty significant change within the Social Security Administration itself. We're seeing these administrative shifts, trying to improve efficiency, service delivery,
Yeah, there's a lot going on there.
The sources even briefly noted the exploration of AI for certain functions, maybe handling phone calls, and okay, that's not the focus of this deep dive.
Right, different topic.
But it kind of underscores that the agency is actively working on modernizing its operations, even while they're handling massive undertakings like these back payments.
And what really stands out when you look at the official numbers is just the sheer volume of money that has already been put into the hands of beneficiaries. I mean, this isn't some small, limited program.
No.
It's a massive payout impacting millions.
Massive is probably an understatement, honestly. The figures cited in the sources show that well over $15 billion has already been distributed.
Yeah, and to be a bit more precise, the official figure reported is about $15.3 billion that has gone out the door so far.
$15.3 billion.
Wow. And like you said, this isn't going to just a select few people. It's been distributed to millions of individuals who were previously getting those reduced benefits.
So $15.3 billion already out, distributed to millions. It's a staggering amount. And this is where it gets maybe more relevant for a lot of listeners right now.
Right.
The process isn't actually complete yet.
Yeah.
The sources confirm there is still a substantial amount of money left to be sent out.
Yes, exactly. There is still approximately another $6 billion that is scheduled to be sent out.
$6 billion more.
And importantly, this remaining amount, it's targeted to go out this month, June.
Okay, so billions already out and billions more coming very, very soon, specifically this month. If you add that up, that brings the total projected payout to, what, over $21 billion?
Yeah.
Based on the $15.3 billion sent and the $6 billion remaining.
That's the math. Yeah. Over $21 billion total.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the individual impact. Because when people hear billions, they immediately think, okay, what does that mean for me or for someone I know? How much are individuals actually receiving in these lump sums?
That's the critical question, isn't it? And the official data gives us a pretty clear picture here. According to a Social Security press release, which the sources cited, the average retroactive payment amount is $6,710.
Oh, $6,710 on average. That is a truly significant lump sum for any individual.
It absolutely is. And, it's really vital to remember that this is an average figure.
Right. Averages can hide a lot.
Exactly. So what that means in practice is, while some people might receive less than that amount, many, many people are receiving substantially more.
Right.
Some could be getting checks for, $10,000, $20,000, maybe even more, depending on their specific situation and how long their previous benefits were being reduced. This isn't pocket change we're talking about. It's a really substantial financial correction for the individuals receiving it.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Receiving a lump sum of nearly $7,000 on average, or potentially much more, that would be genuinely transformative financially for millions of households. It's money they were owed, right? And its arrival now must provide a significant boost.
It really underscores the real-world impact of this action. It's putting substantial funds back into the economy and, directly into the hands of retirees and other beneficiaries.
And it's interesting, the sources kind of trace how these total distribution numbers have increased over time. Like we saw earlier figures mentioned, wasn't it former Acting Commissioner Leland Dudek?
Yes, that's right.
Referencing around $14.8 billion about a month or so prior. as noted in the sources.
Yeah, exactly. And comparing that earlier figure, the $14.8 billion, to the latest $15.3 billion that's already distributed,
Right.
and then knowing there's another $6 billion coming, bringing the total over $21 billion, it vividly illustrates that this is an active, ongoing process. The money is steadily flowing out.
Okay, so we've established these payments are real. They're happening on a massive scale. Individuals are getting substantial average lump sums, representing money they were owed. But like you said, this isn't some random windfall. It's not like a lottery or a government bonus program.
No, not at all.
There's a very specific legislative reason behind all this.
Exactly. These payments are a direct consequence of specific legislation being passed and then signed into law. The driving force behind these back payments is the Social Security Fairness Act.
The Social Security Fairness Act.
Yep.
Okay, that's the key piece of legislation here. And the sources, they detail its journey, right? Showing this wasn't just a sudden thing.
No, definitely not sudden. According to the sources, the act followed the standard legislative path. It passed through the House of Representatives late last year, specifically in November.
November, okay. Then it moved on to the Senate.
Yep, where it was passed in December.
And finally, it became law when?
It was signed into law by the president on January 5th of this year.
January 5th, 2024.
That's right. The sources mentioned there was a signing ceremony marking the official enactment of the law.
So the Social Security Fairness Act is now law. Okay. But what exactly did this act do that triggered these massive back payments for millions of people? What specific provisions did it target?
So at its core, the Social Security Fairness Act repealed two specific provisions that had, for a long time, affected certain Social Security beneficiaries. It repealed the windfall elimination provision, usually known as WEP.
WEP, yeah, heard of that.
And the government pension offset, known as GPO.
WEP and GPO. Okay, those are terms many people impacted are probably very familiar with. But for others, they might just sound like, alphabet soup.
Understandable.
How long had these provisions, WEP and GPO, actually been in effect? Were they recent?
No, far from it. The sources indicate that both WEP and GPO were very long-standing provisions. WEP had been in effect since the early 1980s.
Wow, the 80s.
While GPO was even older, dating back to 1977.
1977. So these were rules that had impacted people's benefits for, what, over 4 decades? Maybe approaching 50 years in some cases?
Exactly. Decades of impact.
Okay, decades of impact. And what exactly did WEP and GPO do to people's Social Security benefits? How do they work? Why were they controversial?
Well, the primary effect of both WEP and GPO was basically to reduce or offset the monthly Social Security benefits for specific groups of people.
Reduce benefits, okay.
The sources clarify this impacted approximately 3.2 million people, and these were typically individuals who had worked a portion of their careers in jobs that were not covered by Social Security.
Meaning they didn't pay Social Security taxes on that specific job income.
Correct. But they did earn a pension from that non-covered employment, often public sector jobs like teachers, firefighters, police in certain states or localities.
Got it. So they had a pension from a job outside Social Security. How did that affect their Social Security?
Well, WEP affected their own Social Security benefits that they earned through other covered employment. GPO, on the other hand, affected spousal or survivor benefits they might have been entitled to based on their spouse's Social Security record.
Okay, so WEP hit your own benefit. GPO hit benefits you might get from a spouse. And the idea was, what? Because they got this other pension, their Social Security was cut.
That was essentially the rationale, yes. The mechanics were different for WEP and GPO, but the result was a lower Social Security benefit check than someone in a similar situation who only had covered employment throughout their career.
How did the reduction actually work? Like, how did WEP lower the benefit?
For WEP, it modified the formula used to calculate a person's Social Security benefit. The standard formula is progressive, meaning it gives a higher percentage return on average lifetime earnings to lower earners.
Right.
WEP used a less favorable calculation for people who also had substantial earnings from non-covered work, effectively reducing the benefit amount they'd get based on their covered earnings.
So instead of getting the full benefit amount their covered work history would normally qualify them for, WEP knocked it down because they also had that non-covered pension on the side.
Exactly. It was originally designed decades ago to prevent what some perceived as double dipping, where someone might benefit fully from both a non-covered pension and a Social Security benefit, calculated as if Social Security was their only retirement income source. That was the original intent, anyway.
Okay, and GPO, how did that work?
GPO was maybe even more impactful for some. It reduced spousal or survivor benefits by 2/3 of the amount of the person's non-covered government pension.
2/3. Wow.
Yeah. So, for example, if you were entitled to a Social Security spousal benefit based on your husband or wife's record, but you also receive, say, a $900 monthly pension from a teaching job not covered by Social Security,
Uh-huh.
GPO would reduce your Social Security spousal benefit by 2/3 of that $900, which is $600.
So your spousal benefit check would be $600 lower each month.
Correct. Or potentially eliminated entirely if 2/3 of your non-covered pension was greater than or equal to the spousal benefit amount.
Next. 2/3 of the non-covered pension can just wipe out the Social Security spousal or survivor benefit. That sounds like it could really significantly impact a household's retirement income plan.
It absolutely did. For potentially millions of spouses and survivors, especially women historically, GPO could completely eliminate their expected Social Security benefit. And you can imagine these provisions, WEP and GPO, they've been subjects of intense debate and advocacy for repeal for decades.
Yeah, I bet.
Many argued they unfairly penalized public servants, like we mentioned, teachers, firefighters, police officers, federal workers under the older CSRS system, people in states and localities that opted out of Social Security for those jobs way back when.
That historical context is definitely important.
Mm.
So for decades, people were pushing for the repeal of these provisions. Now, the Social Security Fairness Act has finally done it, repealed WEP and GPO this year, but why are people getting back payments, and why do they stretch all the way back into last year?
This is the key mechanism, the thing that explains these large lump sums we're seeing. The Social Security Fairness Act, even though it was signed into law on January 5th of this year, it is explicitly retroactive.
Retroactive, meaning it applies to a time before the law was actually enacted.
Precisely. The law's effective date for the repeal of WEP and GPO is retroactive all the way back to January 1st of last year.
January 1st, 2023.
Correct. January 1st, 2023. This is a really crucial detail. It means that legally speaking, beneficiaries who were affected by WEP and GPO should have started receiving their full, unoffset, unreduced Social Security benefit amounts starting way back in January of last year. Their monthly checks should have been higher from that date forward.
Okay, I think I see. So because the law retroactively changed their benefit amount starting January 1st of last year, but their actual checks weren't increased until after the law passed this year, maybe March, April, May.
Yes, exactly. The difference between the higher amount they should have been receiving each month since January 1st of last year and the lower amount they actually received due to WEP or GPO still being in effect. That difference accumulated month after month.
Okay.
So these large back payments, these lump sums, are simply the Social Security Administration sending them the total sum of all those accumulated monthly differences. It's the money they were legally entitled to receive over the past year plus, but didn't get at the time.
So it's literally catching them up on over a year's worth of underpayments based purely on the retroactive start date of the new law.
Exactly right. It's not a bonus payment. It's not extra money. It's the payment of a debt, essentially, that accumulated because the repeal applies retroactively. And the sources help illustrate this. They mention the average monthly increase for affected individuals just from the repeal itself.
Right, you mentioned that. What was that figure again?
Cited around $360 per month on average.
Okay, $360 per month on average increase. So if you take that average monthly increase, $360, and you multiply it by the number of months from January 1st of last year until, let's say, May or June of this year, when maybe a lot of these payments went out.
Yeah, you can see how quickly it adds up. Multiply $360 by, say, 17 or 18 months.
Okay, 360 times 18. That's
You land squarely in the range of that average $6,710 lump sum we talked about earlier.
right around $6,500,
Yeah.
$6,800. Yeah.
So that average payment figure, it's basically the average total of those monthly increases just accumulating over that whole retroactive period. It shows the direct link. Retroactive date, monthly increase from repealing WGPO equals the large lump sum.
That makes it crystal clear. The size of the lump sum isn't arbitrary at all. It's just a direct function of the monthly benefit increase times the duration of that retroactive period until the payment is actually received.
It fully explains the back nature of the payments and the scale of them, tying it directly back to how the Social Security Fairness Act was designed.
Okay, fantastic. So we understand what these payments are and why they're happening. It's the retroactive repeal of WEP and GPO by the Fairness Act. Now, let's talk about who exactly is receiving them and, importantly, when this massive distribution process is expected to finally wrap up.
Right. So as we've discussed, these payments are specifically targeted at that group of approximately 3.2 million people whose monthly Social Security benefits, either their own benefit or spousal survivor benefits, were previously being reduced by either WP or GPO.
Okay.
They are the direct beneficiaries of this legislative change.
So these are the individuals who will not only get this one-time lump sum back payment, but will also see their ongoing regular monthly benefits permanently increase going forward because WP and GPO are just gone now for them. Yeah.
Precisely. That's a key point. The back payment is a one-time catch-up, a correction for the past year plus. But the higher monthly benefit amount, that's a permanent change in their financial picture moving forward.
Okay. Now, while millions have already received their retroactive payments, that $15.3 billion already out the door, the sources indicate that there is still a remaining group waiting. What's the number cited for those still waiting?
The number cited is roughly 900,000 people.
900,000 people still waiting. Now, that sounds like a significant number, and it is, but as the source notes, it's actually a relatively small percentage when you think about the total Social Security beneficiary population, right? Which is well over 60 million people.
That perspective is important, yeah.
Okay.
It's a substantial number in absolute terms. Nearly 1 million people is a lot of people.
Definitely.
But it is a defined subset of the total beneficiary population that the agency is now working to reach with these final payments.
And why are these remaining payments taking a bit longer? Why weren't they all just processed automatically back when the law passed?
Well, the sources explain that processing these remaining nearly 1 million payments requires a significant degree of manual intervention by Social Security staff.
Manual processing. In this day and age, for almost 1 million payments, that seems counterintuitive, maybe, given the scale we're talking about.
It does seem that way on the surface, but it really points to the complexity involved in these specific cases. For the individuals in this remaining group, it's likely that their records require a more detailed, hands-on review to accurately calculate the exact retroactive amount they're owed.
Why would that be?
Oh, it could be due to various complexities in their work history, maybe details about their non-covered pension, changes in their circumstances over the retroactive period, or maybe just the way their original WEP or GPO offset was initially applied in the system years ago.
Okay.
You know, automated systems can handle the straightforward calculations for millions relatively easily, but complex edge cases, unusual situations, they often require human review and adjustment to get it right.
That makes sense. You need a person to look at the nuances.
Exactly. And the sources even mention that Social Security is reportedly pulling staff from other areas within the agency.
Oh, really?
To specifically prioritize and help expedite the processing and distribution of these particular manual payments.
Okay, so they are dedicating extra human resources, pulling people from other jobs to tackle this manual workload and try to speed things up. That definitely indicates a commitment to getting these last payments out efficiently.
It seems so, yes.
And does the agency provide a timeline? Is there a deadline for when these remaining 900,000 payments will be completed?
Yes. Thankfully, Acting Commissioner Frank Bisignano has provided a clear and pretty firm deadline. He stated publicly that all of these remaining back payments will be completely distributed by the end of this month.
By the end of June.
Okay.
Given that we are, as the sources noted, in early June now, that means the roughly 900,000 people still waiting can expect their payments within, what, the next 3 weeks or so?
That's the target the agency has publicly set for itself. And the source's perspective on this is that hitting this deadline is pretty important, as it will effectively wrap up this specific phase of implementing the WEP-GPO repeal. It allows the conversation around these specific back payments to kind of move toward completion.
Right. Getting that last $6 billion out the door by the end of June, that's a concrete goal. So, okay, that covers the back payments themselves and their distribution timeline. What should people who are affected, or maybe just those interested in Social Security generally, expect looking ahead now?
Well, probably the most significant ongoing impact for those 3.2 million beneficiaries is, as we mentioned, the permanent increase in their monthly Social Security benefits.
Right, the ongoing checks.
The back payment was crucial. It corrected the past year, but going forward, every single month, they will continue to receive that higher unoffset amount. That's a lasting improvement in their financial security.
That's a really important point to keep reiterating. The lump sum is great. Maybe how it helps pay off bills or provides a cushion. But that sustained increase in monthly income provides genuine long-term financial stability.
Absolutely. And, the sources raise kind of an interesting point regarding those 900,000 payments that are still pending distribution this month.
Oh, what's that?
They suggest there's actually a strong possibility that the average retroactive payment amount for this remaining group could actually end up being higher than the $6,710 average we discussed for the group that has already been paid.
Higher. Why would the average payment be larger for the people who are getting theirs later? That seems counterintuitive again.
The reasoning, as the sources outline it, is actually pretty straightforward, and it ties directly back to that retroactive effective date of the law, January 1st of last year.
Okay.
Since the repeal was effective back then, every single month that passes before a person receives their retroactive lump sum payment adds another month's worth of that benefit increase, that roughly $360 average, to their accumulated total.
Ah, okay. So as someone who got their payment back in, say, April, received maybe 16 months worth of retroactive pay calculated into their lump sum,
Right.
then someone receiving theirs at the very end of June will get, what, around 18 months worth included in their lump sum calculation.
Exactly. The longer the processing takes for an individual case within this time frame, the more months of accumulated owed back pay get added into their final lump sum check.
So the math just works out that way.
Correct. Therefore, the average for the remaining 900,000 people who are receiving their payments later in this distribution cycle is likely to be somewhat higher on average than the group who received theirs earlier this year.
Interesting. Did the sources give any potential figures?
Yeah, they cited some hypothetical figures based on this accumulating effect, suggesting the average for this remaining group could rise from that overall $6,110 mark to something like maybe $6,822, or potentially even reaching into the $7,800 plus range, depending on the exact distribution timing within June.
Wow, potentially over $700-800 on average for this last group.
Yep.
So for those still waiting, while the delay is undoubtedly frustrating,
Must be, yeah.
their eventual lump sum might actually be even larger on average as a result of that delay. That's a significant potential outcome to keep in mind.
It is. It's a direct consequence of the timing of the payments relative to the retroactive start date when the higher benefits officially began accruing.
And the sources also noted the importance of just staying updated in the current environment,
Right.
mentioning that interesting or potentially significant events or announcements might be anticipated in the near future, possibly even within the next week or so.
Yes, the landscape related to Social Security and fiscal policy in general, it's constantly evolving, as you know. The sources suggest that given the current environment, just staying informed about potential new developments or announcements is probably prudent. Wrapping up these WP-GPO payments is a major milestone for the agency.
For sure.
But there may well be other issues or discussions emerging soon that are worth paying attention to.
Which is precisely why we do these deep dives, right? To try and help you navigate this constant flow of information. We'll certainly continue to monitor the official sources and keep you informed about any significant developments related to Social Security as they arise.
Absolutely. Our goal is always to provide you with the key insights so you're not caught off guard and can understand the implications of these changes.
Okay, great. So let's try and tie all of this back to you, the listener. When we step back, what's the ultimate impact of these back payments and the repeal of WEP and GPO?
Well, the core impact, really, is a substantial positive financial correction for millions of people. It's money that was previously being withheld or reduced due to these long-standing controversial provisions.
Right.
And it's now being paid out, first as a significant lump sum to catch people up, and then critically as that permanent increase in their ongoing monthly retirement income. For the 3.2 million affected individuals, this represents a really meaningful improvement in their financial well-being.
Yeah, it's undeniably great news for those specific individuals who were impacted by WP and GPO for all those years. The sources also, they briefly acknowledge that while this is fantastic for the recipients, it may be understandable that others who aren't in this group might feel, well, the source used the phrase, a little jealous.
Mm-hmm. That reaction is probably quite natural, right?
Right.
When you hear about billions of dollars being distributed and large individual payments going out, if it doesn't directly apply to your own situation, it's easy to feel that way, perhaps.
Yeah.
It just highlights that changes within a vast, complex system like Social Security, even changes that are intended to correct previous policies deemed unfair, can resonate very differently across the wider population.
Absolutely. Social Security touches so many lives in so many different ways. So we definitely encourage you listening to consider your own situation, perhaps the situations of people you know, parents, friends, former colleagues who might be affected by this change. Does this information spark any questions for you?
Yeah, what stands out?
We're always keen to hear what resonates or what you'd like to understand maybe in more detail down the road.
Your engagement really helps us understand what aspects are most relevant and impactful out there.
We truly value that input.
Yeah.
So just to recap the absolute key points of this deep dive one last time.
Okay. The central message is significant Social Security back payments are actively being distributed right now. They're averaging over $6,700 per person, going out to approximately 3.2 million people.
Right. And this is the direct result of the Social Security Fairness Act finally repealing the windfall elimination provision, WEP, and the government pension offset, GPO,
Correct.
which had previously reduced benefits for these individuals, often for decades.
Billions have already been paid out. That specific figure was $15.3 billion so far. And the remaining amount, roughly $6 billion, covering about 900,000 people, is scheduled to be completely distributed by the end of this month, June. That's according to the Social Security Acting Commissioner.
And critically, maybe the most important long-term point, beyond that retroactive lump sum payment, these affected beneficiaries will continue to receive permanently higher monthly Social Security benefits every month going forward.
That's the lasting change.
It really is a major financial event, correcting these decades-old controversial policies. Now, to leave you with a final thought-provoking question based on our deep dive today, something to mull over.
Okay. Considering the detail we explored about those approximately 900,000 remaining payments that specifically require manual processing by Social Security staff.
Right, the ones taking longer. What is the necessity for manual processing of nearly 1 million individual payments, in our modern, supposedly automated era? What does that tell us about the inherent scale, the complexity, and maybe the legacy systems involved in managing a program is absolutely vast and critical to national financial security as Social Security?
Yeah, it really prompts reflection, doesn't it, on the immense administrative challenge of just overseeing a system that impacts tens of millions of lives daily and requires such precise, individualized calculations for an incredibly diverse range of personal circumstances and work histories built up over lifetimes.
A truly complex, massive undertaking, no doubt about it. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the Social Security back payments. We really hope this has clarified what's happening, why it's happening, and why it's so significant for millions.
And we appreciate you spending this time with us to become better informed. We'll keep sifting through the information, monitoring the developments, and continue to bring you the key insights as they emerge.
Okay, let's dive in. We are looking today at something pretty huge, actually. It involves potentially millions of people and just staggering amounts of money.
Yeah.
Billions, truly.
Billions with a B, yeah. It's quite something.
We're talking about these significant Social Security back payments. Checks that are actually hitting bank accounts right now as we speak all across the country. It's a huge injection of cash for retirees, for beneficiaries. And the numbers, honestly, they're kind of eye-popping. They really are quite exciting when you think about the difference it makes to people. We've got sources saying over $15 billion has already gone out.
Already distributed, yes.
And the average payment, it's over $6,700 per person. That's a serious amount.
It really is a significant lump sum.
And here's the kicker. Really, there's more coming. Another massive wave, about $6 billion more, is expected to be sent out, wait for it, this month.
That's right. Very soon.
So more money, potentially life-changing amounts for some, arriving for hundreds of thousands of people any day now.
It really is a major financial event happening right now for, a very large number of folks across the U.S. And our mission today, really, is to unpack all of this. We've gone through the source material you provided. These are official reports from the Social Security Administration itself, recent press releases, statements from their leadership, specifically the acting commissioner.
Right, Frank Bisagno, I think.
That's the one mentioned, yes. And we want to pull out the key info from these documents. We need to understand first just the sheer scale of these payments, then, why? Why are they happening now? Who's actually getting this money? And crucially, when are those remaining payments expected to land?
Exactly. Because like you said before we started, this isn't some lottery win. It's not just random good luck.
No, not at all. It's a direct result. The sources are clear of specific legislation. A change in the law corrected some long-standing rules.
A specific correction. Okay, so let's hammer down those headline numbers again, just based on the sources we have. Over $15 billion, actually. $15.3 billion, to be exact, already sent out. Just think about that amount. $15 billion already in people's pockets in communities.
It's an incredible sum, and that average payment figure they cite is very specific. $6,710.
Wow. I mean, imagine getting a check for that amount unexpectedly. For a lot of people, that's a huge financial boost, right? It covers a big repair, helps with bills, maybe even allows for something nice like travel, or just provides some breathing room.
Absolutely. And it's really important to stress, as sources do, that figure, the $6,710, it is an average.
All right, some get less, some get more.
Exactly. Some individuals, depending on their specific work history and benefit situation, might receive less than that. But many, many others are receiving significantly more than the average. That total, the $15.3 billion already distributed, that reflects millions of people who've received these funds.
Millions.
Yes. It's a massive administrative effort just to calculate and send out these sums correctly to such a large group.
So millions have already seen this benefit, which is a fantastic news for them. But like you said, the story isn't quite over. The sources are pointing to a still really substantial amount left to go out.
That's right, approximately another $6 billion. The phrasing used is give or take a little bit, which is understandable with estimates of this size.
$6 billion more. And the acting commissioner, Bisagno, has apparently confirmed that this amount, this final batch, is expected to be distributed this month, June.
Yes, this month. That's the timeline provided in the statements we reviewed.
So for the people still waiting, and we'll get to how many that is a potentially significant sum, another maybe large lump sum payment, is still heading their way very, very soon. It definitely adds to the positive story here, knowing there's more good financial news coming down the pipeline for a big group.
And we can quantify that group still waiting. The sources put the number at roughly 900,000 people.
900,000.
Now, compared to the tens of millions receiving Social Security overall, that might sound like a small percentage, but 900,000 individuals is still a huge number of people.
Yeah, that's a city's worth of people.
Exactly. And each one of them is due a potentially large sum, particularly when you consider that average payment figure we've been discussing, and maybe even higher, as we'll get into. So understanding the scale, both the dollars and the number of people already paid and still waiting, that's really step one here. It's a massive positive financial adjustment for a significant chunk of the population.
Okay, scale established. Massive. Billions out, billions more coming this month. Huge average payments making a real difference. But the big question remains, why? Why now? What flipped the switch to release all this money? You mentioned it's not random, it's based on law.
Precisely. The sources couldn't be clearer on this. These payments are the direct consequence of specific, recently passed legislation. It's not just, Social Security deciding to change how they calculate things going forward or some kind of pilot program. It comes straight from a law passed by Congress and signed by the president.
And the specific law we're talking about is the Social Security Fairness Act. That's the name.
That's the one, the Social Security Fairness Act. The sources actually detail its path through Congress, and for major legislation, it moved pretty quickly.
Okay, what was the timeline?
It passed in the House of Representatives back in November of last year. Then it moved over to the Senate, and they passed it in December of last year.
So end of last year, both House and Senate passed it.
Yeah.
That suggests pretty broad agreement, perhaps.
It certainly suggests significant support, yes. And following that passage in both chambers, the act was signed into law by the president. That happened on January 5th of this year.
January 5th, 2025. Got it.
Yes. The sources even mention a signing ceremony, which usually highlights the importance placed on a piece of legislation. And this timeline passed late last year, signed early this year, is really important because it sets up when the law officially started, which, as we'll definitely discuss, is the absolute key to understanding why people are getting these large back payments now. It wasn't stuck in limbo. It moved relatively fast from passage to law.
Right, so the Social Security Fairness Act becomes law in January. What did it actually do? What was the mechanism inside that act that unlocked these billions?
The core action, and this is highlighted again and again in the source materials, was the repeal of two specific long-standing provisions within the Social Security system. These provisions had been around for decades and significantly affected the Social Security payments for certain groups of beneficiaries.
Okay, repealing old rules. Which ones?
They were called the windfall elimination provision, usually just called WEP, and the government pension offset, or GPO.
WEP and GPO. Okay. These might ring a bell for some listeners who follow Social Security closely, but what did they actually do? Why did repealing them lead to more money?
Good question. Because understanding their function is crucial. The sources note these rules had been on the books for a very long time. They originated back in the late 1970s and early 1980s.
Wow. Okay, so 40, maybe pushing 50 years.
Roughly, yes. 40-some years these rules were in effect, and they specifically applied to people who received a pension from a job where they did not pay Social Security taxes.
Ah, okay, so like certain public sector jobs.
Exactly. Think of many state or local government employees, teachers, firefighters, police officers in certain jurisdictions, some federal employees under the older system, people who had their own pension system through that job instead of paying into Social Security for that particular work.
Got it. So WEP and GPO were rules for people who had a pension from non-Social Security covered work. But what did the rules actually do to the Social Security benefits they might have earned from other jobs where they did pay in, or maybe based on a spouse's record?
That's the crux of it. WEP and GPO reduced or offset the Social Security benefits these individuals were otherwise entitled to. The windfall elimination provision, WEP, specifically affected the calculation of someone's own Social Security retirement or disability benefit if they also had a pension from that non-covered work.
How did it reduce it?
It changed the formula Social Security uses to calculate benefits. For people subject to WEP, the formula used a lower factor for a portion of their earnings, resulting in a smaller monthly Social Security check than someone with the same earnings history, but only from jobs covered by Social Security. The original idea, decades ago, was to prevent what Congress saw as an unintended windfall, getting both a full non-covered pension and a Social Security benefit that might look disproportionately high based on fewer years of covered earnings.
Okay, so WEP hit your own earned benefit. What about the GPO, the government pension offset?
GPO worked a bit differently. It affected spousal or survivor benefits. So, if you received a pension from non-covered government work, GPO would reduce any Social Security spousal or survivor benefit you might have been eligible for based on your spouse's work record.
By how much?
Specifically, it reduced that Social Security spousal or survivor benefit by 2/3 of the amount of your non-covered government pension. So if you had a $900 monthly government pension, your Social Security spousal benefit could be reduced by $600.
Ouch.
Yeah, the rationale there was to treat these non-covered pensions somewhat similarly to how Social Security treats someone receiving their own Social Security retirement benefit when they also qualify for a spousal benefit. Generally, you get the higher of the two, not both in full. GPO applied a similar reduction logic when the pension came from outside the Social Security system. So WEP reduced your own earned benefit, GPO reduced your benefit as a spouse or survivor, both because you had a pension from non-covered employment.
Understood. So, for decades, these two rules, WEP and GPO, systematically lowered the Social Security payments for millions of people who had this specific kind of mixed work history.
Precisely. And their repeal, thanks to the Social Security Fairness Act, has had this direct positive financial consequence for a very large group. The sources estimate that approximately 3.2 million people were affected by either WEP or GPO before the repeal.
3.2 million. That's a lot of people impacted over the years.
It is. And now, with the repeal, their Social Security benefit calculations are no longer subject to those reductions, those offsets. It fundamentally changed the math for them, meaning they are now entitled to a higher monthly Social Security benefit going forward.
Okay, that connects the dots clearly. The Social Security Fairness Act repeals WEP and GPO. This corrects the benefit calculation for those 3.2 million people, meaning they are now due a higher monthly amount. That makes perfect sense for why their ongoing monthly checks will be larger now. But it still doesn't quite explain those huge lump sums we started with. That average of over $6,700, a higher monthly check going forward is great, but where does the big one-time payment come from?
And that brings us right to the next critical piece of this puzzle. This is the core reason for these large catch-up payments, the big retroactive checks people are getting, because here's where the timeline we discussed earlier and one specific detail about how the law was written becomes incredibly important and, frankly, really impactful for those affected. Even though the Social Security Fairness Act, remember, wasn't signed into law until January 5th of this year.
Right, just a few months ago.
Correct. But the sources all emphasize a critical detail. The law's effects are retroactive. It's not just about changing the calculation from January 5th onward.
Okay, retroactive.
Yeah.
Back to when? How far back does it go?
The sources state the Act's effective date goes all the way back to January of last year, January 2024.
Wait, seriously? A law signed in January 2025 takes effect starting January 2024. It's a full year before it was even officially law.
That's exactly what the source materials confirm regarding the law's provisions. It's a crucial detail. And because the law retroactively changed what these 3.2 million beneficiaries should have been paid, starting way back in January of last year.
But they weren't getting that higher amount yet because the law wasn't passed and Social Security hadn't updated their payments.
Exactly. There was this growing gap between what they were actually receiving under the old ABU-PGPO rules and what they should have been receiving according to the new law month after month, starting from January 2024.
Ah, okay, I see it now.
So these large lump sums, the $15 billion already paid out, the $6 billion still coming, they are literally retroactive back payments. They are designed to make up that difference, to catch up the beneficiaries for all the money they were legally entitled to, but didn't receive during that period from January of last year until Social Security could implement the change and adjust their regular monthly payments going forward.
So they're getting a check that covers the shortfall for all those past months. The sources actually put a number on that monthly difference, didn't they, on average?
Yes, they did. They state that, on average, the beneficiaries affected by the WEE-GPO repeal should have been receiving around $360 more per month, starting back in January of last year, if the repeal had been instantly effective then.
$360 a month, on average.
That average monthly increase, that $360 figure, is key. It's not just a random number. It represents the average amount per month that WEP or GPO was reducing someone's benefit, and that reduction was wiped out by the new law.
Okay, so let's put that together. Just do the simple math like the sources suggest. You've got an average monthly increase of $360 that people were due starting January of last year. Now, if you're getting a back payment today or this month, that covers the period from January 2024 up to now. Well, $360 a month adds up really fast, doesn't it?
It really does. The sources basically illustrate it like this. That big lump sum payment is essentially the average monthly increase, the $360, multiplied by the number of months that have passed since January 2024, during which the beneficiary was being underpaid according to the new law.
So let's say someone's payment gets processed now, covering, what, January 24 through maybe June 25.
That's 18 months.
Right, 18 months. So if you take that average $360 increase and multiply it by 18 months.
$360 times 18.
Mm-hmm.
Carry the one, that's $6,480.
Exactly. $6,480.
Yeah.
And look how close that simple calculation based on the average monthly increase gets us to the reported average lump sum payment of $6,710.
Yeah, very close. The difference could just be variations around the average, or maybe some people's payments covered slightly different periods.
Precisely. But that basic math, the monthly amount owed times the number of months owed, that's the origin of these significant retroactive checks. People are literally getting the accumulated funds they were legally entitled to since January of last year paid out now in one go to make them whole for that past period. It's a really clear example of how a change in law, especially one with a retroactive clause, translates directly into real money, significant money for individuals. And it's not like found money or bonus. It's money they should have been receiving all along under the new rules, just paid late because of the legislative and administrative timeline.
Well put. It's a correction.
And while millions have already received this correction, this catch-up money, the sources remind us there are still about 900,000 people waiting for theirs. Why the delay for this last group? What's different about them?
The sources explain that for this remaining group, these roughly 900,000 individuals, their payments require manual processing by Social Security staff.
Manual processing.
Yeah.
For almost 1 million people.
Yes. Unlike a lot of standard benefit adjustments, or CLAs, which can often be handled largely through automated computer systems once the rules are programmed in, these specific retroactive calculations and distributions, especially for this particular group, seem to involve complexities that need a human touch, individual review, and manual handling.
Okay. Manual processing for 900,000 cases. That sounds like a monumental task. Why would these specific cases need eyes-on review instead of being automated? What kind of complexities are we talking about?
Well, the sources don't detail every single reason, but typically in large-scale benefit systems like Social Security, manual review is triggered by cases with, say, unique circumstances, maybe discrepancies in their earnings records between the jobs where they paid Social Security taxes and the non-covered job. Perhaps they have very complex work histories spanning many decades, or maybe there are interactions with other types of benefits they receive that complicate the retroactive calculation.
Okay.
Think about it. You have to accurately calculate the WEP or GTO reduction under the old rules, sometimes going back years, then figure out precisely what the benefit should have been without that reduction, month by month, starting January of last year, and calculate the difference. For someone with a straightforward history, maybe automation works. But if there are gaps or questions about pension amounts or periods of disability or other factors.
It probably needs a person to sort it out properly.
Exactly. An automated system might flag it as an exception needing review. So each of these 900,000 cases likely has some specific nuance that kicked it out of the automated flow and requires careful manual calculation and verification.
That really highlights the sheer administrative effort involved here. It's not just flipping a switch.
Yeah.
And the sources actually mention the effort, right? Saying that Social Security is pulling staff from other duties.
Yes, that detail is in there. It says staff from other areas within the Social Security Administration are being temporarily reassigned to prioritize getting these specific payments processed and delivered. That's a significant internal shift of resources.
Oh.
It really indicates this is an all-hands-on-deck kind of situation within the agency. They are focusing resources to clear this backlog and get this money out as quickly as they can, even if it means other work might slow down a bit temporarily. It shows a real commitment to finalizing these payments for this large group that's waited the longest.
And they have a deadline for this big push, right?
Yeah.
The acting commissioner gave a time frame.
Yes, the sources quote the acting commissioner, Frank Bisagno, stating that the goal, the expectation, is to have all of these remaining manually processed payments completely distributed by the end of this month.
By the end of June.
By the end of June, correct. According to the sources, that's the target. So within the next, maybe 3 weeks or so from when this source material came out, the administration expects to have processed and sent out all these back payments to those roughly 900,000 people.
That's a pretty ambitious target for manually handling nearly 1 million complex cases, but it must be incredibly welcome news for those still waiting to hear, okay, by the end of June.
It provides a clear time frame, absolutely. It shows they're working towards a finish line for this whole process that started with the Fairness Act becoming law.
Okay, so that's the plan for the remaining $6 billion going out to those 900,000 people. Now, there was another interesting point the sources brought up regarding the average payment amount. We talked about the $6,710 average for those who've already received theirs. But the sources suggested this average might actually go up for the payments still being processed.
Yes, that's a possibility raised in the material we reviewed, that the average payment received by this final group of 900,000, or perhaps the overall average once every single payment is accounted for, could end up being higher than the $6,710 reported so far.
And the reasoning behind that, based on what you explained about the retroactivity and the monthly catch-up, it actually makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
It does. The logic laid out is pretty straightforward. The longer it takes to process someone's payment, the more months have passed since the retroactive start date of January 2024.
Right. So more months of that $360 average increase get added to their total lump sum.
Exactly. Consider someone whose payment was processed relatively early. Maybe it covered, say, 15 months of retroactive pay from Jan 24 through March 25. Their lump sum reflects those 15 months. But someone whose case is complex, requires manual review, and isn't finalized until the very end of June 25. Their payment will cover the entire period from January 2024 through June 2025. That's 18 full months.
So naturally, their lump sum calculation, $360 times 18 months, using the average, would be larger than someone paid earlier covering fewer months.
Correct. So because this group of 900,000 has, by definition, waited longer than the initial recipients, their individual back payments are likely to cover a longer period of underpayment. This means their checks will, on average, probably be larger simply because more time has elapsed, accumulating more retroactive pay.
Which would then push up the average payment figure for this final group and potentially nudge the overall average higher once all the dust settles. The sources even threw out some potential higher average numbers, didn't they? Like, what was it, $600-800 or maybe even higher?
Yeah, they mentioned potential new average amounts being discussed or anticipated, citing figures like $6,822 or even possibly approaching $7,800 as an average for this group, or the final overall average.
Wow, $7,800 average would be huge.
It would be. These figures are presented in the sources as anticipated increases, reflecting this dynamic of ongoing processing time leading to larger accumulated retroactive payments for those processed later. The sources suggest we might see official updates from Social Security confirming a higher average as they get closer to completing all payments by the end of this month.
So it wouldn't be a surprise at all, given the math we just walked through. It just means the financial boost for this remaining group could be even more significant on average than what the first wave of recipients received.
That seems very plausible based on the mechanics described.
Okay, so let's pull this all together. We've covered the truly massive scale. Billions already paid, billions more landing this month, average payments in the thousands of dollars, potentially rising even higher. We've pinned down the legislative trigger of the Social Security Fairness Act, repealing those old WEP and GPO rules that cut benefits for folks with certain public pensions. We've clarified why these are big lump sum back payments, because the law change was made retroactive all the way back to January of last year, so these checks are catching people up for the higher amounts they were owed since then, based on that average $360 monthly increase.
Right. Making them whole for that period.
And we've looked at the process for the final stretch, getting payments out to the roughly 900,000 people still waiting, the need for careful manual processing, the big administrative effort involved, and that target completion date of the end of this month's June. Plus, the likelihood that their average payment might be even higher because they've waited longer.
A comprehensive picture, yeah.
So now, let's bring it back home. Why does all this matter to you, the listener, tuning in today?
That really is the key question, isn't it? I think the main takeaway from digging into these sources is seeing how a specific, fairly recent change in the law directly reversed older rules that had impacted millions for decades. And that single legislative act has unleashed billions of dollars in retroactive payments, providing significant financial benefits to millions, with a large chunk still arriving very soon. It's a powerful demonstration of how policy choices directly impact people's finances.
Yeah, and even if maybe you listening right now weren't personally affected by WEP or GPO, maybe you don't have one of those non-covered pensions in your work history, and you are getting one of these checks. Understanding how a law like the Social Security Fairness Act can have such a huge positive financial ripple effect through the Social Security system is still really important, I think. It helps you be more informed about how this vital program works, how it can change, and how those changes affect real people.
Absolutely. It shows that direct line between laws made in Washington and the checks arriving in mailboxes or bank accounts across the country. This isn't some abstract policy debate. The source can confirm it's real money, billions of dollars, flowing to millions of actual people, because the rules were changed to correct what were seen as unfair reductions.
And it's all confirmed by Social Security officials. Based on the reports and statements we've looked at, it also shows this system, responding to the law, even though it's taking a massive administrative effort, especially with all that manual processing for the final group, they are working to implement the change and get people the benefits they're now legally owed.
It's a complex system trying to execute a complex retroactive change accurately for millions.
So just to quickly recap our journey today, we unpacked the immense scale, the billions involved, the $6,700 plus average payments, and the billions more coming this month. We identified the cause, the Social Security Fairness Act, repealing WEP and GPO.
We explained the why behind the back pay, that crucial retroactivity to January of last year, making people eligible for higher payments since then, leading to these large catch-up sums based on the average $360 monthly difference.
And finally, we looked at the complex logistics of getting the rest of the money out to the remaining 900,000 people, the manual processing involved, the agency effort, the end of June target, and that potential for an even higher average payment for them.
It really has been a fascinating deep dive into how one legislative change aimed at fairness can trigger such a significant operational response and financial distribution within a massive program like Social Security.
Definitely. And here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on, something that really struck me from reading these sources.